the medieval scholars who preserved knowledge through the Dark Ages. The fire of knowledge, once a blazing beacon that had illuminated the great civilizations of antiquity, was sputtering. In the West, the Roman Empire, a behemoth that had provided a framework for law, order, and intellectual exchange for centuries, was in the process of crumbling. Waves of barbarian invasions, political instability, and economic collapse plunged Europe into a period of profound uncertainty and decline. The great libraries, once vibrant centers of learning, were ransacked and burned. The intricate web of scholarship that had connected thinkers across the Mediterranean was torn asunder. It was a time of immense loss, a descent into what many would later refer to as the Dark Ages. The accumulated wisdom of generations, the philosophical insights of Plato and Aristotle, the mathematical genius of Euclid and Archimedes, the literary masterpieces of Homer and Virgil, all seemed poised to vanish into the mists of time, lost forever to future generations. But in the flickering embers of a dying world, a few courageous souls refused to let the light of knowledge be extinguished. They were quiet heroes of a forgotten age, the medieval scholars who, through sheer determination and unwavering faith, undertook the monumental task of preserving the intellectual heritage of the past. In isolated monasteries, bustling Islamic cities, and the courts of enlightened rulers, these dedicated individuals painstakingly copied, translated, and studied the fragile manuscripts that were the last remaining links to a more enlightened era. They were the guardians of a precious legacy, the keepers of a flame that, without their tireless efforts, would have been swallowed by the encroaching darkness. It is the story of their struggle, their sacrifice, and their ultimate triumph. A tale of how knowledge was saved from the brink of oblivion and passed down through the centuries, a gift to a future they could only have imagined. Welcome to Unlocking Great Minds, where we explore the untold stories of the figures who have shaped our world. In this installment, we journey back to a time of turmoil and transformation to uncover the remarkable story of the medieval scholars who preserved knowledge through the Dark Ages. We will explore the vital role of monastic scriptoriums, where monks toiled in silence to copy ancient texts, and the vibrant intellectual centers of the Islamic world, where scholars not only preserved, but also expanded upon the wisdom of the ancients. We will meet the key figures who championed the cause of learning, from the encyclopedic Isidore of Seville to the visionary Alcuin of York, who spearheaded the Carolingian Renaissance. We will examine the very manuscripts themselves, the beautiful and fragile artifacts that bear witness to this extraordinary chapter in human history. Join us as we unlock the story of the medieval scholars, the unsung heroes who ensured that the light of knowledge would continue to shine even in the darkest of times. The collapse of the Roman world was not a single event, but a protracted process of decline that unfolded over several centuries. The internal decay of the empire, characterized by political instability, economic hardship, and social unrest, was exacerbated by the relentless pressure of barbarian migrations along its borders. The consequences for the intellectual life of the West were catastrophic. The intricate infrastructure that had supported scholarship and learning for generations began to unravel. State-sponsored education, once a cornerstone of Roman society, withered away. The great libraries, which had served as repositories of knowledge and centers of intellectual exchange, fell into neglect or were destroyed in the chaos of war and invasion. The decline in literacy was precipitous. In the early Roman Empire, it is estimated that around 10% of the population was functionally literate, a figure that, while low by modern standards, was unprecedented in the ancient world. By the early Middle Ages, literacy had become the exclusive preserve of a tiny clerical elite. The sophisticated legal and administrative systems of the Roman state, which had relied on a literate bureaucracy, were replaced by the more rudimentary customary laws of the Germanic successor kingdoms. The loss of knowledge was not merely a matter of declining literacy rates. It was also a result of the erosion of educational standards. It was a fundamental rupture in the transmission of ideas. The complex philosophical and scientific traditions of the Greco-Roman world, which had been built upon a foundation of critical inquiry and rational debate, were lost mainly to the Latin West. The works of Plato and Aristotle, the cornerstone of ancient philosophy, became inaccessible as knowledge of the Greek language faded. The scientific achievements of figures like Euclid, Archimedes, and Ptolemy were forgotten, replaced by a more rudimentary and often superstitious understanding of the natural world. The rich literary heritage of antiquity, from the epic poems of Homer to the sophisticated dramas of Sophocles, survived only in fragments, if at all. The vibrant intellectual culture of the Roman world, which had fostered a spirit of inquiry and innovation, gave way to a more insular and dogmatic worldview, one in which the preservation of religious orthodoxy took precedence over the pursuit of secular knowledge. It was against this backdrop of intellectual decline and cultural fragmentation that the medieval scholars embarked on their heroic mission to preserve the flickering flame of knowledge for future generations. In the midst of this intellectual darkness, a new institution arose that would become the unlikely guardian of classical learning, the monastery. The monastic movement, which originated in the deserts of Egypt and Syria in the 3rd and 4th centuries, was founded on the principle of withdrawal from the world in pursuit of spiritual perfection. Yet, paradoxically, it was these very communities of ascetics and contemplatives that would play a pivotal role in preserving and transmitting the intellectual heritage of the ancient world. The early desert fathers, such as Saint Anthony, emphasized a life of solitary prayer and self-denial. However, as the monastic movement grew and spread to the West, it developed a more communal and organized character. Figures like Saint Pachomius in Egypt and Saint Basil in Cappadocia established the first monastic communities, or cenobia, in which monks lived and worked together under a common rule. These early monastic rules, while primarily focused on spiritual matters, also emphasized the importance of manual labor and self-sufficiency. It was in this context that the practice of reading and copying manuscripts first became an integral part of monastic life. The most influential figure in the development of Western monasticism was Saint Benedict of Nursia. His rule, written in the 6th century for his monastery at Monte Cassino, became the blueprint for monastic life throughout Europe. The rule of Saint Benedict struck a balance between prayer, work, and study, creating a stable and ordered environment in which learning could flourish. Benedict's insistence on the importance of daily reading, or lectio divina, ensured that every monk was literate and had access to the sacred texts. The monastery library, which in the early Middle Ages was often little more than a small collection of books kept in a chest, became the heart of the monastic community. The monks were not only readers, but also producers of books. The scriptorium, or writing room, became a standard feature of every monastery, and the copying of manuscripts was considered a sacred duty, a form of manual labor that was both spiritually edifying and intellectually demanding. The monks who toiled in the scriptoria, often in difficult and uncomfortable conditions, were the unsung heroes of the early Middle Ages, the silent guardians of a precious intellectual legacy. While Saint Benedict laid the spiritual and organizational groundwork for Western monasticism, it was another Italian scholar, Cassiodorus, who provided the intellectual blueprint for preserving classical learning. Flavius Magnus Aurelius Cassiodorus Senator, to give him his full name, was a Roman statesman and writer who served in the court of the Ostrogothic king Theodoric the Great. After a long and distinguished political career, Cassiodorus retired to his estate at Vivarium in southern Italy, where he founded a monastery in the mid-6th century. The vivarium was not just a place of religious devotion, it was a center of scholarship, a deliberate and conscious attempt to preserve the intellectual heritage of the Roman world during a time of profound cultural crisis. Cassiodorus's vision was to create a Christian university. In this place, monks could pursue both sacred and secular learning, and where the great works of classical literature and science could be copied and studied. The curriculum that Cassiodorus established at the vivarium was laid out in his most important work, the Institutiones Divinarum et Saecularium Literarum, Institutes of Divine and Secular Letters. The Institutiones was a comprehensive guide to the study of both Christian and classical texts, providing a detailed reading list for the monks of the vivarium. The first part of the work was devoted to studying the Bible and the writings of the Church Fathers. The second part, however, was a survey of the 7 liberal arts: grammar, rhetoric, logic, arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy. It was a radical departure from the prevailing monastic ethos, which often viewed secular learning with suspicion, if not outright hostility. Cassiodorus argued that the study of the liberal arts was not only compatible with the Christian life, but was, in fact, essential for a proper understanding of Scripture. He believed that the intellectual tools of classical antiquity could be used to illuminate the truths of the Christian faith. The most important legacy of the vivarium was its scriptorium. Cassiodorus was a passionate bibliophile, and he amassed a vast library of both Christian and classical texts. He understood that the survival of these works depended on their being copied and disseminated, and he made the scriptorium the heart of his monastic community. The monks of the vivarium were not just scribes, they were also scholars, editors, and translators. They were trained in the art of textual criticism and encouraged to compare different versions of a text to produce the most accurate and reliable copy possible. They also translated important Greek works into Latin, making them accessible to a broader audience. The vivarium was a short-lived experiment. It did not survive long after Cassiodorus's death. However, its influence was profound. The model of a monastic community dedicated to both sacred and secular learning, and the emphasis on the systematic copying and preservation of manuscripts, would be taken up by other monasteries throughout Europe, most notably by the Irish and Anglo-Saxon monks, who would play such a crucial role in the transmission of knowledge in the centuries to come. While the flame of learning was being carefully tended in Italy by figures like Cassiodorus, a different and equally vibrant intellectual tradition was taking root on the westernmost fringes of Europe. Ireland, an island that had never been part of the Roman Empire, developed a unique form of Christianity and a flourishing monastic culture that would play a pivotal role in preserving and transmitting knowledge during the early Middle Ages. The story of Irish monasticism is a remarkable one, a testament to the power of faith, learning, and cultural exchange in a time of profound uncertainty. Christianity arrived in Ireland in the 5th century, most notably through the missionary efforts of St. Patrick. The form of Christianity that developed in Ireland, often referred to as Celtic Christianity, had a distinctive character. It was organized not around a diocesan structure of bishops and priests, as was common in the rest of the Christian world, but around a network of powerful and influential monasteries. These monasteries were not only centers of religious devotion, but also vibrant centers of learning, art, and culture. The Irish monks, also known as peregrini, were renowned for their asceticism, missionary zeal, and love of learning. They embraced a life of voluntary exile, leaving their homeland to found monasteries in remote and inhospitable places, from the windswept islands of the North Atlantic to the heart of continental Europe. The most famous of these Irish monastic foundations was Iona, established by St. Columba in 563 on the small island of Iona off the west coast of Scotland. Iona became a beacon of learning and a center for the production of some of the most beautiful illuminated manuscripts of the early Middle Ages, including the celebrated Book of Kells. The Irish monks were not only skilled scribes and artists, but also accomplished scholars. They had a deep reverence for the written word, and they cultivated a love of learning that extended beyond the confines of the sacred texts. Unlike their counterparts in continental Europe, who had largely lost the knowledge of Greek, the Irish monks continued to study the language of the ancient philosophers and poets. They also developed a sophisticated tradition of biblical exegesis, combining the allegorical methods of the Church Fathers with a characteristically Irish love of intricate detail and complex symbolism. The Irish monasteries were not only repositories of knowledge, but also dynamic centers of intellectual exchange and learning. They attracted scholars from all over Europe and sent their own monks to found new monasteries and teach in the courts of kings and emperors. The influence of the Irish monks on the intellectual life of early medieval Europe was profound. They played a crucial role in the conversion of the Anglo-Saxons to Christianity. They were instrumental in the Carolingian Renaissance, a significant cultural and intellectual revival that took place under the patronage of Charlemagne in the 8th and 9th centuries. The Irish monks were the keepers of a precious intellectual flame, and they carried that flame back to a continent that had been plunged into darkness, helping to lay the foundations for the intellectual and cultural rebirth of the High Middle Ages. While Irish monks were spreading their unique brand of Christianity and learning across Europe, a parallel intellectual flowering was taking place in the Anglo-Saxon kingdom of Northumbria. The Northumbrian Renaissance of the 7th and 8th centuries resulted from the fusion of Irish and Roman Christian traditions, producing one of the most outstanding scholars of the early Middle Ages, the Venerable Bede. Bede's life and work represent the culmination of the intellectual currents that had been flowing from Ireland and Rome into the Anglo-Saxon world, and his writings would become a cornerstone of medieval learning for centuries to come. Bede was born in 673 on the lands of the newly founded monastery of Monkwearmouth in Northumbria. At the age of 7, he was sent to the monastery to be educated. and he would spend the rest of his life within the walls of Monk Wearmouth and its sister monastery at Jarrow. Bede's world was a small one, but his mind was vast. He had access to one of the finest libraries in Europe, a collection of books painstakingly assembled by the founders of his monastery, Benedict Biscop and Culfrid. This library, which contained works from Ireland, Rome, and the continent, provided Bede with a comprehensive education in both sacred and secular learning. He became a master of the liberal arts, a skilled linguist with a knowledge of Greek and Hebrew, and a prolific writer who produced a vast body of work on a wide range of subjects. Bede's most famous work is his Historia Ecclesiastica Gentis Anglorum, Ecclesiastical History of the English People, a masterpiece of historical writing that recounts the story of the Anglo-Saxons' conversion to Christianity. The Historia Ecclesiastica is a remarkable achievement, not only for its engaging narrative and its vivid portrayal of the personalities and events of the period, but also for its sophisticated use of sources and its critical approach to historical evidence. Bede was a meticulous historian, and he took great care to consult a wide range of written and oral sources, to weigh their reliability and to distinguish between fact and hearsay. His work set a new standard for historical writing in the Middle Ages, and it remains an indispensable source for our understanding of early Anglo-Saxon England. But Bede was not just a historian. He was also a theologian, a biblical scholar, a chronologist, and a poet. He wrote commentaries on numerous books of the Bible, combining the allegorical methods of the Church Fathers with a characteristically Anglo-Saxon love of practical and moral instruction. He was also a pioneer in the field of computus, the science of calculating the date of Easter, and his work on this subject helped to resolve a long-standing controversy that had divided the Irish and Roman churches.
Bede's influence on the intellectual life of the Middle Ages was immense. His writings were copied and studied in monasteries throughout Europe, and they became standard textbooks in the monastic and cathedral schools. He was, in the words of one modern historian, the schoolmaster of the Middle Ages, a figure who not only preserved the learning of the past but also shaped the intellectual landscape of the future. The intellectual currents that had been flowing from Ireland and Northumbria into continental Europe converged in the late 8th and early 9th centuries, creating a remarkable period of cultural and intellectual revival known as the Carolingian Renaissance. This Renaissance, which took place under the patronage of the Frankish king and emperor Charlemagne, was a deliberate and conscious attempt to revive the intellectual and cultural glories of the Roman Empire in a new Christian context. It was a time of extraordinary creativity and innovation, a period in which the foundations were laid for the intellectual and cultural development of the High Middle Ages. Charlemagne, a ruler of immense energy and ambition, understood that the effective governance of his vast empire depended on a literate and educated clergy and administration.
He was a devout Christian and also a pragmatist.
He recognized that the intellectual and moral decay of the Frankish Church was a threat to the stability of his realm, and he was determined to carry out a thoroughgoing reform of both the Church and the state. To this end, he embarked on an ambitious program of educational and cultural renewal, which would have far-reaching consequences for the future of European civilization. The centerpiece of Charlemagne's cultural program was the palace school at his court in Aachen. It was not a school in the modern sense of the word, but rather a community of scholars that Charlemagne had recruited from all over Europe. The leading figure in this community was the Northumbrian scholar Alcuin of York, whom Charlemagne had met in Italy in 781. Alcuin was a product of the Northumbrian Renaissance, a man who embodied the best of both the Irish and Roman Christian traditions. He was a skilled teacher, a talented administrator, and a prolific writer, quickly becoming Charlemagne's most trusted advisor on all matters relating to education and culture. Under Alcuin's leadership, the palace school became a vibrant center of intellectual life. The curriculum was based on the 7 liberal arts, the traditional framework for classical education, but it was adapted to the needs of a Christian society. The primary goal of the school was to train a new generation of literate and educated clergy and officials who could carry out Charlemagne's program of reform. The students of the palace school were not just monks and priests, they included the sons of the Frankish nobility, as well as Charlemagne himself and members of his family. Alcuin was a gifted teacher, possessing a talent for making complex subjects accessible and engaging. He wrote a series of textbooks on the liberal arts, which became standard works in the monastic and cathedral schools for centuries to come. One of the most significant achievements of the Carolingian Renaissance was the development of a new script, known as Carolingian minuscule. This script, developed by the scribes of the Carolingian court, was clear, elegant, and highly legible, representing a vast improvement over the cramped and often illegible scripts of the early Middle Ages. Monasteries and scriptoria quickly adopted the Carolingian minuscule throughout the Carolingian Empire, and it became the standard script for the copying of manuscripts for the next 4 centuries. The development of this new script was a crucial step in preserving and transmitting knowledge. It made books easier to read and copy, helping to create a more uniform and standardized book culture throughout Europe. The Carolingian Renaissance was not just a matter of educational reform and scribal innovation. It was also a time of great artistic and architectural creativity. Charlemagne was a great patron of the arts, commissioning the construction of magnificent churches and palaces, most notably the Palatine Chapel at Aachen, which was modeled after the Church of San Vitale in Ravenna. The artists of the Carolingian court produced exquisite illuminated manuscripts, intricate ivory carvings, and beautiful works of goldsmithing. This artistic revival, like the educational and scribal reforms, was part of a conscious effort to revive the glories of the Roman past and create a new Christian empire that would be a worthy successor to the Roman Empire of the Caesars. The Carolingian Renaissance was a pivotal moment in the history of European civilization. It was an era when the intellectual and cultural heritage of the ancient world was not only preserved but also revitalized and transformed. The scholars of the Carolingian court, under the leadership of Alcuin of York, laid the foundations for the intellectual and cultural development of the High Middle Ages. They created a new educational curriculum, a new script, and a new artistic and architectural style. They also fostered a new spirit of intellectual inquiry and a new sense of cultural unity in Europe. The Carolingian Renaissance was a testament to the power of a single individual, Charlemagne, to shape the course of history, and it was a tribute to the enduring legacy of the medieval scholars who had kept the flame of learning alive in the darkest of times. While the monasteries of Western Europe were engaged in the arduous task of preserving and copying the remnants of classical learning, a different and even more dynamic intellectual efflorescence was taking place in the Islamic world. The period from the 8th to the 13th centuries is often referred to as the Islamic Golden Age, a time of extraordinary scientific, economic, and cultural flourishing. During this period, the Islamic world became the global center of science, philosophy, medicine, and education. Its scholars not only preserved the knowledge of the ancient world but also made significant original contributions to a wide range of fields. The foundations for the Islamic Golden Age were laid by the Abbasid Caliphate, which came to power in the mid-8th century. The Abbasids moved the capital of the Islamic world from Damascus to Baghdad, a city that they founded on the banks of the Tigris River. Under the patronage of the Abbasid caliphs, Baghdad emerged as a vibrant, cosmopolitan center, a melting pot of cultures and ideas, and the intellectual hub of the world. The Abbasids were great patrons of learning, actively seeking out and supporting scholars from all over their vast empire, regardless of their religious or ethnic background. The most important institution of the Islamic Golden Age was the House of Wisdom, Beit al-Hikmah, established in Baghdad in the early 9th century by Caliph al-Ma'mun. The House of Wisdom was not just a library, it was a major intellectual center, a place where scholars from different traditions could come together to translate, study, and discuss the great works of science and philosophy. The heart of the House of Wisdom was the translation movement, a massive and systematic effort to translate the scientific and philosophical works of the ancient Greeks, Persians, and Indians into Arabic. This translation movement was one of the most significant intellectual undertakings in human history. It made the accumulated wisdom of the ancient world accessible to a new generation of scholars, laying the foundations for the scientific and philosophical achievements of the Islamic Golden Age. The scholars of the House of Wisdom were not just passive translators, they were also active researchers and original thinkers. They critically engaged with the texts they were translating, often writing commentaries and treatises to correct, update, and expand upon the work of their predecessors. In the field of mathematics, scholars like Al-Khwarizmi developed the system of algebra and introduced the Hindu-Arabic numerals to the Western world. In medicine, physicians such as Al-Razi and Ibn Sina, Avicenna, produced encyclopedic works that synthesized the medical knowledge of the ancient Greeks and Indians, making significant original contributions to the diagnosis and treatment of diseases. In philosophy, thinkers such as Al-Kindi, Al-Farabi, and Ibn Rushd, Averroes, engaged in a creative dialogue with the works of Plato and Aristotle, developing a rich and sophisticated philosophical tradition that would have a profound influence on both the Islamic and Christian worlds. The Islamic Golden Age was a testament to the power of cultural exchange and intellectual curiosity. The scholars of the Islamic world not only preserved the knowledge of the ancient world, they also transformed it, creating a new and dynamic intellectual synthesis that would shape the course of human history for centuries to come. The knowledge that was preserved and developed in the Islamic world eventually found its way back to Europe through the translation centers of Spain and Sicily, playing a crucial role in sparking the intellectual and cultural revival of the High Middle Ages and the Renaissance. By the 12th century, the cumulative efforts of centuries of knowledge preservation began to bear spectacular fruit. The intellectual seeds planted by Irish monks, nurtured by Anglo-Saxon scholars such as Bede, and cultivated during the Carolingian Renaissance ultimately blossomed into a new and dynamic institutional form, the university. The rise of universities in the High Middle Ages marked a pivotal shift in the intellectual landscape of Europe. Learning, which had been cloistered within the walls of monasteries for centuries, now moved into the bustling heart of the burgeoning cities. This period witnessed an intellectual awakening, a thirst for knowledge, and a renewed confidence in the power of human reason that had not been seen in the West since ancient times. The first universities, at Bologna, Paris, and Oxford, were not founded by royal decree or papal bull but emerged organically from the less formal cathedral schools that had become centers of learning in the 11th and 12th centuries. As these schools attracted more and more students and masters, they organized themselves into guilds, or universitates, to protect their collective interests and regulate the quality of teaching. The curriculum of these new institutions was based on the traditional 7 liberal arts. Still, it was revolutionized by the influx of new knowledge that was pouring into Europe from the Islamic world. The translation movement, centered in places like Toledo in Spain and Sicily, was making the great works of Greek and Arabic science and philosophy available to Latin Christendom for the first time in centuries. The rediscovery of Aristotle's complete works, in particular, had a transformative impact on European thought. Aristotle's logical treatises, his works on natural philosophy, and his writings on metaphysics and ethics provided a comprehensive and systematic framework for understanding the world, one that challenged and ultimately reshaped the intellectual traditions of the West. Out of this ferment of new ideas and new institutions emerged a new method of inquiry, scholasticism. Scholasticism was a method of critical thought that dominated teaching in the medieval universities from about 1100 to 1700. It was not a philosophy or a theology in itself, but rather a method of learning that placed a strong emphasis on dialectical reasoning. The primary purpose of scholasticism was to find the answer to a question or to resolve a contradiction. The scholastic method involved a thorough and critical reading of a text, the identification of key questions and points of disagreement, and the systematic application of logic to arrive at a reasoned conclusion. It was a method that prized precision, clarity, and logical rigor, training generations of students to think critically and engage in reasoned debate. The greatest of the scholastic thinkers was Thomas Aquinas, a Dominican friar who taught at the University of Paris in the 13th century. Aquinas's monumental achievement was to synthesize Christian theology with the philosophy of Aristotle. In his most famous work, the Summa Theologica, Aquinas demonstrated that faith and reason are not in conflict but are, in fact, two complementary paths to the same truth. He argued that the truths of the natural world, which could be discovered through reason and observation, were in harmony with the truths of divine revelation, which were known through faith. Aquinas's work was a testament to the intellectual confidence and optimism of the High Middle Ages, a period when scholars believed they could reconcile the wisdom of the ancients with the teachings of the Christian faith to create a comprehensive and unified understanding of the universe. The rise of universities and the development of scholasticism were the culmination of a long and arduous process of preserving and transmitting knowledge. They were the legacy of medieval scholars who kept the flame of learning alive through the darkest of times, laying the foundations for the scientific revolution and the intellectual and cultural achievements of the modern world. The preservation of knowledge in the Middle Ages was not merely a matter of copying texts, it was also an act of artistic creation. The illuminated manuscripts that were produced in the scriptoria of monasteries and the workshops of secular artists are among the most beautiful and enduring artifacts of the medieval world. These manuscripts, with their intricate decorations, their vibrant colors, and their lavish use of gold and silver, were not just books, they were objects of devotion, symbols of wealth and power, and testaments to the skill and artistry of the men and women who created them. The art of manuscript illumination had its roots in the late antique world, but it was in the monasteries of early medieval Ireland that it reached its first great flowering. The Irish monks, with their love of intricate patterns and their sophisticated understanding of color and design, created a series of masterpieces, including the Book of Dao, the Lindisfarne Gospels, and the Book of Kells. These manuscripts are characterized by their complex interlace patterns, stylized animal motifs, and an abstract, highly decorative approach to the human figure. The artists who created these works were not interested in creating a realistic representation of the world. Instead, they sought to evoke a sense of wonder and awe, and to give visual expression to the mystery and majesty of the divine. The tradition of manuscript illumination was carried from Ireland and Northumbria to the continent by the missionary monks who played such a crucial role in the Carolingian Renaissance. The artists of the Carolingian court, inspired by the example of insular manuscripts and classical Roman art, created a new and more naturalistic style of illumination. They were interested in creating a sense of depth and volume, in depicting the human figure with greater realism, and in telling a story through their art. The illuminated manuscripts of the Carolingian period, such as the Godescalc Evangelistery and the Utrecht Psalter, are characterized by their lively and expressive figures, their use of classical architectural motifs, and their sophisticated understanding of perspective and composition. The art of manuscript illumination reached its zenith in the High Middle Ages, a period of great economic prosperity and cultural dynamism. The rise of the universities, the growth of cities, and the emergence of a wealthy and literate laity created a new and expanding market for books. The production of illuminated manuscripts, which had been the exclusive preserve of monasteries for centuries, now became a significant industry, with professional artists and workshops in centers such as Paris, London, and Bologna. The illuminated manuscripts of the Gothic period are characterized by their elegance, their refinement, and their extraordinary attention to detail. The artists of this period were masters of their craft, creating a wide range of manuscripts. These included lavish Bibles and psalters for wealthy patrons, as well as more modest books of hours for the personal devotion of the laity. These manuscripts, with their delicate marginalia, humorous drolleries, and beautiful, often touching depictions of everyday life, provide a fascinating window into the world of the High Middle Ages. The illuminated manuscript was a testament to the medieval love of beauty, craftsmanship, and learning. It was a collaborative effort, involving the skills of the parchment maker, the scribe, the illuminator, and the bookbinder. It was a symbol of the enduring power of the written word, a tribute to the medieval scholars who had dedicated their lives to preserving and transmitting knowledge. The illuminated manuscripts that have survived to the present day are a precious legacy, a tangible link to a world that, in many ways, is remote and unfamiliar, yet also a vital part of our own intellectual and cultural heritage. The story of the medieval scholars is a powerful reminder that the preservation of knowledge is not a passive act but an active and often arduous struggle. It is a story of courage, resilience, and unwavering dedication in the face of overwhelming odds. The men and women who toiled in the scriptoria of remote monasteries, who debated in the vibrant intellectual centers of the Islamic world, and who taught in the nascent universities of Europe, were not just preserving the past. They were building the future. They were the guardians of a precious flame, and they passed that flame on to succeeding generations, a gift of incalculable value. Their legacy is all around us, in the books we read, the languages we speak, and the very foundations of our modern world. The next time you pick up a book, visit a library, or engage in a reasoned debate, take a moment to remember the medieval scholars who made it all possible. In their story, we find not just a history of the past, but a lesson for the future, that the pursuit of knowledge is a noble and essential human endeavor, one that must be cherished, protected, and passed on to future generations. What forgotten knowledge from our own time will future generations yearn to rediscover? And who, in our own age of digital ephemera and fleeting information, will be the new guardians of our collective memory, the modern-day scribes ensuring that the light of knowledge continues to shine for centuries to come? No figure better embodies the spirit of intellectual preservation in the early Middle Ages than Isidore of Seville. A Hispano-Roman scholar and Archbishop of Seville in the 7th century, Isidore lived in a world that was still grappling with the legacy of the Roman Empire and the new realities of the Germanic successor kingdoms. In this time of profound cultural and political transition, Isidore embarked on a monumental project, to compile a comprehensive encyclopedia of all knowledge. This work would serve as a bridge between the classical past and the Christian future. This work, the Etymologies, would become one of the most influential books of the Middle Ages, a veritable treasure trove of information that scholars would consult for centuries to come. The Etymology is a vast and sprawling work, a testament to Isidore's insatiable curiosity and his encyclopedic mind. The work is divided into 20 books, each devoted to a different subject. The first 3 books cover the 7 liberal arts, the traditional framework for classical education. The subsequent books deal with a wide range of topics, including medicine, law, the Bible, the church, language, geography, architecture, agriculture, and warfare. Isidore's approach is etymological. He believed that the meaning of a word could be discovered by tracing its origins. This approach, while often leading to fanciful and unscientific conclusions, was also a powerful tool for organizing and classifying knowledge. By arranging his material according to the etymology of words, Isidore was able to create a coherent and systematic overview of the entire field of human knowledge. The sources that Isidore drew upon for the Etymology were vast and varied. He had access to a rich library of classical and Christian texts, and he made extensive use of the works of earlier encyclopedists, such as Pliny the Elder and Aulus Gellius. He also drew upon the writings of the Church Fathers, notably Augustine and Jerome. Isidore was not an original thinker, he was a compiler, a synthesizer, and a man who saw his primary task as preserving and transmitting the knowledge of the past. He was, in the words of one modern historian, a conduit through which the learning of the ancient world flowed into the Middle Ages. The influence of the Etymology on the intellectual life of the Middle Ages was immense. It was copied and studied in monasteries and cathedral schools throughout Europe, and it became a standard reference work for scholars and students. It was a book read by everyone, from the great scholars of the Carolingian Renaissance to the humble monks of remote Irish monasteries. The Etymology was not just a repository of information, it was also a way of thinking, a model for organizing and understanding the world. It provided a framework for the medieval curriculum, and it shaped the intellectual worldview of generations of scholars. Isidore of Seville was a man who stood at a crossroads of history, a figure who looked back to the classical past and forward to the Christian future. His Etymology served as a bridge between these two worlds, a testament to the enduring power of knowledge and the human desire to comprehend the world in all its complexity and wonder. The Carolingian Renaissance was not merely a revival of classical learning, it was a comprehensive program of cultural and political renewal that aimed to create a unified and Christianized empire. Charlemagne, a ruler of extraordinary vision and energy, understood that the strength of his empire depended not just on military might but also on a shared culture and a standard set of values. He saw the church as the essential glue that could bind together the diverse peoples of his vast realm, and he was determined to reform and revitalize this crucial institution. The educational and cultural reforms of the Carolingian Renaissance were thus inextricably linked to Charlemagne's broader political and religious ambitions. The court at Aachen was the epicenter of this cultural renewal. Charlemagne transformed his capital from a provincial backwater into a vibrant cosmopolitan center, a second Rome that would rival the glories of the ancient imperial city. He surrounded himself with a brilliant circle of scholars, poets, and artists, men who had been drawn to his court from all corners of Europe. This court was not only a center of political power, but also a hub of intellectual and artistic activity. The scholars of the court engaged in lively debates on a wide range of subjects, from theology and philosophy to grammar and astronomy. They composed poetry, wrote histories, and produced exquisite works of art. The court at Aachen was a place of extraordinary intellectual ferment, where the ideas and traditions of the past were not only preserved but also reinterpreted and transformed. The educational reforms of the Carolingian Renaissance were the cornerstone of Charlemagne's cultural program. He issued a series of capitularies, or royal decrees, that mandated the establishment of schools in every cathedral and monastery within his empire. These schools were to provide a basic education in reading, writing, and arithmetic for both the clergy and the laity. The curriculum was based on the 7 liberal arts, but it was adapted to the needs of a Christian society. The primary goal of the schools was to produce a literate and educated clergy who could effectively administer the sacraments, preach the gospel, and manage the church's affairs. The reforms also aimed to create a more educated laity, a class of literate officials who could serve in the imperial administration and help to create a more just and orderly society. Alcuin of York was the driving force behind these educational reforms. As the head of the palace school, he was responsible for developing the curriculum, training the teachers, and overseeing the production of textbooks. He was a gifted educator with a talent for making complex subjects accessible and engaging. He believed that education should be a joyful and collaborative process, and he encouraged his students to ask questions, to challenge assumptions, and to think for themselves. Alcuin's influence extended far beyond the walls of the palace school. His students went on to become bishops, abbots, and scholars in their own right, and they carried his educational vision to all corners of the Carolingian Empire. The schools founded during the Carolingian Renaissance laid the groundwork for the intellectual and cultural development of the High Middle Ages, paving the way for the rise of universities in the 12th and 13th centuries. The Carolingian Renaissance was a pivotal moment in the history of European civilization. It was an era when the intellectual and cultural heritage of the ancient world was not only preserved but also revitalized and transformed. The scholars of the Carolingian court, under the leadership of Alcuin of York, laid the foundations for the intellectual and cultural development of the High Middle Ages. They created a new educational curriculum, a new script, and a new artistic and architectural style. They also fostered a new spirit of intellectual inquiry and a new sense of cultural unity in Europe. The Carolingian Renaissance was a testament to the power of a single individual, Charlemagne, to shape the course of history, and it was a tribute to the enduring legacy of the medieval scholars who had kept the flame of learning alive in the darkest of times. The translation movement that flourished in the House of Wisdom was a highly organized and sophisticated enterprise. It was not a haphazard process of individual scholars translating texts on their own initiative, but rather a state-sponsored project driven by a clear intellectual and political agenda. The Abbasid caliphs, particularly Al-Ma'mun, understood that knowledge was a source of power and prestige, and they were determined to make Baghdad the intellectual capital of the world. They invested vast sums of money in acquiring manuscripts, sending emissaries to the Byzantine Empire and other parts of the world to purchase or copy rare and valuable texts. They also established a team of highly skilled translators, who were paid handsome salaries and given access to the best available resources. The translation process itself was a collaborative and multi-stage affair. A text would first be translated from its original language, usually Greek or Syriac, into Arabic. This initial translation would then be reviewed and revised by a team of scholars, who would compare it with other versions of the text and with the original manuscript, if available. The goal was to produce a translation that was not only accurate but also elegant and readable. The translators of the House of Wisdom were not just linguists, they were also experts in the subjects they were translating. They possessed a profound understanding of the philosophical, scientific, and medical concepts discussed in the texts and were able to convey these concepts in clear and precise Arabic. One of the most important figures in the translation movement was Hunayn ibn Ishaq, a Nestorian Christian physician and scholar who became the leading translator of Greek medical texts into Arabic. Hunayn was a master of both Greek and Arabic, and he had a profound understanding of the medical theories of Hippocrates and Galen. He translated a vast number of Greek medical works into Arabic, including the entire corpus of Galen's writings. He also wrote several original medical works, in which he synthesized the knowledge of the ancient Greeks with his own clinical observations. Hunayn's translations were of such high quality that they became the standard medical textbooks in the Islamic world for centuries. They were also translated into Latin and Hebrew, and had a profound influence on the development of medicine in medieval Europe. The legacy of the House of Wisdom and the translation movement is immense. The scholars of the Islamic Golden Age not only preserved the knowledge of the ancient world, they also transformed it, creating a new and dynamic intellectual synthesis that would shape the course of human history for centuries to come. The knowledge that was preserved and developed in the Islamic world eventually found its way back to Europe through the translation centers of Spain and Sicily, playing a crucial role in sparking the intellectual and cultural revival of the High Middle Ages and the Renaissance. The House of Wisdom was a testament to the power of cultural exchange and intellectual curiosity, and it remains a powerful symbol of the enduring human quest for knowledge. The rise of the universities in the High Middle Ages was a transformative event in the intellectual history of Europe. These new institutions, which emerged in the 12th and 13th centuries, were not only centers of learning, they were also vibrant and often tumultuous communities, where students and masters from all over Europe gathered to live, learn, and engage in debate. The student experience in a medieval university was a far cry from the carefully structured and regulated world of the modern university. It was a world of intellectual excitement, of personal freedom, and of considerable hardship and danger. The medieval university's curriculum was based on the 7 liberal arts, which were divided into 2 parts, the trivium and the quadrivium. The trivium, which consisted of grammar, rhetoric, and logic, was the foundation of the curriculum. It was designed to provide students with the basic tools of literacy and critical thinking. The quadrivium, which consisted of arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy, was the more advanced part of the curriculum. It was designed to provide students with a more specialized knowledge of the natural world. The curriculum was taught in Latin, the universal language of scholarship in the Middle Ages, and it was based on a close reading and analysis of a set of prescribed texts. The works of Aristotle, rediscovered in the 12th century, were at the heart of the curriculum, supplemented by the writings of other classical and Christian authors. Student life in a medieval university was a mixture of intellectual stimulation and material hardship. Students were typically young men in their late teens or early 20s, and they came from diverse backgrounds, ranging from the sons of nobility to those from humble peasant families. They were drawn to the universities by a thirst for knowledge and a desire for social advancement. The universities were situated in the heart of the burgeoning cities of the High Middle Ages, and students were immersed in the vibrant and often chaotic urban environment. They lived in rented rooms or in college dorms, which were residential communities designed to offer students a more structured and supportive environment. The relationship between the students and the townspeople was often fraught with tension, and there were frequent clashes between town and gown. Students were also a notoriously rowdy and undisciplined bunch, known for their heavy drinking, brawling, and general disregard for authority. The intellectual culture of the medieval university was one of intense and often passionate debate. The scholastic method, with its emphasis on dialectical reasoning, encouraged students to question, to challenge, and to argue. The central event of the academic year was the disputation, a formal debate in which a master or a student would defend a thesis against all comers. These disputations were not just academic exercises, they were also public spectacles, and they often attracted large and enthusiastic audiences. The intellectual life of the university was not confined to the classroom. Students and masters would gather in taverns and private homes to discuss and debate the latest ideas. The universities were places of extraordinary intellectual ferment, where the great questions of theology, philosophy, and science were debated with a passion and rigor not seen in Europe for centuries. Thomas Aquinas was the towering intellectual figure of the High Middle Ages, a man whose work represents the culmination of the scholastic tradition. Aquinas was a Dominican friar who taught at the University of Paris in the 13th century. He was a prolific writer, producing a vast body of work on a wide range of subjects, including theology, philosophy, ethics, and politics. His most famous work, the Summa Theologica, is a monumental synthesis of Christian theology and Aristotelian philosophy. In the Summa, Aquinas sought to demonstrate that faith and reason were not in conflict, but rather two complementary paths to the same truth. He argued that the truths of the natural world, which could be discovered through reason and observation, were in harmony with the truths of divine revelation, which were known through faith. Aquinas's work was a testament to the intellectual confidence and optimism of the High Middle Ages, a period when scholars believed they could reconcile the wisdom of the ancients with the teachings of the Christian faith to create a comprehensive and unified understanding of the universe. The rise of universities and the development of scholasticism were the culmination of a long and arduous process of preserving and transmitting knowledge. They were the legacy of medieval scholars who kept the flame of learning alive through the darkest of times, laying the foundations for the scientific revolution and the intellectual and cultural achievements of the modern world. The art of the illuminated manuscript was a testament to the medieval love of beauty, craftsmanship, and learning. It was a collaborative effort, involving the skills of the parchment maker, the scribe, the illuminator, and the bookbinder. It was a symbol of the enduring power of the written word, a tribute to the medieval scholars who had dedicated their lives to preserving and transmitting knowledge. The illuminated manuscripts that have survived to the present day are a precious legacy, a tangible link to a world that, in many ways, is remote and unfamiliar, yet also a vital part of our own intellectual and cultural heritage. Two of the most magnificent examples of the art of the illuminated manuscript are the Book of Kells and the Lindisfarne Gospels. These two works, both produced in the Insular, or Hiberno-Saxon, tradition, represent the pinnacle of early medieval book art. They are a testament to the skill, artistry, and devotion of the monks who created them, providing a fascinating window into the intellectual and spiritual world of the early Middle Ages. The Book of Kells, created in the late 8th or early 9th century, is one of the most famous and beautiful manuscripts in the world. It is a lavishly decorated copy of the four Gospels in Latin, believed to have been produced in a monastery on the island of Iona, off the coast of Scotland, or in a related monastery at Kells, Ireland. The Book of Kells is a masterpiece of insular art, characterized by its intricate interlace patterns, stylized animal motifs, and vibrant, imaginative use of color. The most famous page in the manuscript is the Chi-Rho page, which is a full-page illustration of the first two letters of Christ's name in Greek. The Chi-Rho page is a dazzling display of artistic virtuosity, a symphony of swirling spirals, intricate knots, and hidden figures. It is a work of art that is both deeply symbolic and intensely personal, a testament to the artist's faith and his creative genius. The Lindisfarne Gospels, created in the early 8th century at the monastery of Lindisfarne off the coast of Northumbria, are another masterpiece of insular art. The Lindisfarne Gospels is a copy of the four Gospels in Latin, renowned for its beautiful and intricate carpet pages, which are full-page abstract designs placed at the beginning of each Gospel. The carpet pages are a stunning display of artistic skill, a mesmerizing combination of intricate interlacing patterns, vibrant colors, and complex geometric designs. The Lindisfarne Gospels also contain a series of evangelist portraits, which are full-page illustrations of the four Gospel writers. These portraits are a fascinating blend of classical and insular artistic traditions, offering a vivid and engaging portrayal of the men who wrote the Gospels. The Book of Kells and the Lindisfarne Gospels are more than just beautiful works of art, they are also important historical documents. They provide a fascinating insight into the intellectual and spiritual world of the early Middle Ages, a world in which faith and learning were inextricably intertwined. They are a testament to the enduring power of the written word and a tribute to the medieval scholars who dedicated their lives to preserving and transmitting knowledge. The illuminated manuscripts that have survived to the present day are a precious legacy, a tangible link to a world that, in many ways, is remote and unfamiliar, yet also a vital part of our own intellectual and cultural heritage. The collapse of the Roman world was not only an intellectual and cultural catastrophe, but also a profound social and economic crisis. The intricate web of trade and commerce that had bound the empire together for centuries unraveled, leading to a dramatic decline in urban life and a return to a more localized and agrarian economy. The consequences of this economic collapse were far-reaching, creating a challenging and often hostile environment in which medieval scholars had to carry out their work of knowledge preservation. The Roman Empire was a highly urbanized society. Its cities were centers of government, commerce, and culture, and a sophisticated network of roads and sea lanes connected them.
The cities were the engines of the Roman economy, and they were home to a diverse population of merchants, artisans, and officials.
The decline of the Roman Empire led to a dramatic deurbanization of the West. Cities shrank in size and population, and many were abandoned altogether. The significant public buildings of the Roman era, the temples, the basilicas, the amphitheaters, fell into ruin, and the once bustling streets became deserted. The decline of the cities was a direct consequence of the breakdown of the Roman economic system. The disruption of trade routes, the decline in agricultural production, and the constant threat of barbarian invasion made it increasingly difficult to sustain large urban populations. The breakdown of trade networks was a key factor in the economic collapse of the late Roman Empire. The Roman world was a vast and interconnected economic zone, and goods and commodities were traded over long distances. The grain of Egypt fed the population of Rome, the wine of Gaul was enjoyed in Britain, and the spices of the East were a luxury item for the wealthy elite. The barbarian invasions and the political fragmentation of the empire disrupted these trade networks, making it increasingly difficult and dangerous to transport goods over long distances. The decline in trade had a profoundly devastating impact on the West's economy. It led to a decline in manufacturing, a shortage of essential goods, and a return to a more localized and subsistence-based economy. The social consequences of the economic collapse were equally profound. The Roman world was a highly stratified society, with a small and wealthy elite at the top and a vast population of peasants and enslaved people at the bottom. The economic crisis of the late Roman Empire exacerbated these social divisions. The wealthy elite retreated to their country estates, where they resided in fortified villas and exercised control over the local population, much like feudal lords. The peasants, who had once been independent smallholders, were increasingly tied to the land either as tenants or as serfs. The decline of the cities and the breakdown of trade networks also led to a decline in social mobility. As time went on, it became increasingly complex for people to improve their social and economic position, and society became more rigid and hierarchical. It was in this context of economic decline, social upheaval, and political fragmentation that the medieval scholars had to carry out their work. The monasteries, often located in remote and isolated areas, became self-sufficient economic units and were able to weather the storms of the early Middle Ages better than the cities. The monks who toiled in the scriptoria were not just scholars, they were also farmers, artisans, and administrators. They were part of a community dedicated to preserving knowledge and ensuring the survival of civilization during a time of profound crisis. The collapse of Roman authority in the West did not create a political vacuum. Instead, a series of Germanic successor kingdoms emerged, each with its own unique blend of Roman and Germanic traditions. These kingdoms, often founded by military leaders who had previously served in the Roman army, represented the new political reality of the early Middle Ages. The scholars and monks who worked to preserve the knowledge of the past had to navigate this complex and often volatile political landscape. The attitude of the Germanic rulers towards classical learning varied widely, from the enlightened patronage of Theodoric the Great in Ostrogothic Italy to the relative indifference of the early Merovingian kings in Francia. The Visigothic kingdom in Spain was one of the most enduring of the Germanic successor states in Europe. The Visigoths, who had sacked Rome in 410, eventually settled in Gaul and Spain, where they established a kingdom that would last for nearly 3 centuries. The Visigothic kings were Arian Christians, which created a religious divide between them and their predominantly Catholic Roman subjects. However, the Visigoths were also profoundly influenced by Roman culture, adopting many of the Roman state's institutions. The Visigothic Code, a comprehensive legal code that was issued in the 7th century, was a fusion of Roman and Germanic legal traditions. The Visigothic kingdom was also a center of learning, and it produced one of the most outstanding scholars of the early Middle Ages, Isidore of Seville. Isidore's Etymology was a testament to the enduring legacy of classical learning in Visigothic Spain, and it would become one of the most influential books of the Middle Ages. The Ostrogothic kingdom in Italy was another critical Germanic successor state. The Ostrogoths, under their king Theodoric the Great, conquered Italy in the late 5th century. Theodoric, educated at the Byzantine court in Constantinople, was a great admirer of Roman culture and pursued a policy of cooperation and accommodation with the Roman elite. He preserved the Roman administrative system, and he was a great patron of art and architecture. His court at Ravenna was a hub of learning and culture, attracting scholars from all over the Mediterranean world. 2 of the most important figures at Theodoric's court were Boethius and Cassiodorus. Boethius, a Roman senator and philosopher, wrote his most famous work, The Consolation of Philosophy, while imprisoned by Theodoric. Cassiodorus, a Roman statesman and writer, founded the Monastery of Vivarium, which became a model for preserving classical learning in the early Middle Ages. The Ostrogothic kingdom was short-lived. The Byzantine Empire conquered it in the mid-6th century. However, its legacy was profound. It demonstrated that it was possible for Roman and Germanic cultures to coexist and to create a new and vibrant civilization. The Frankish kingdom, founded by Clovis in the late 5th century, was the most potent and enduring of the Germanic successor states. The Franks, who were a pagan people, converted to Catholic Christianity under Clovis, which gave them a crucial advantage over their Arian rivals. The Frankish kingdom, under the Merovingian dynasty, was a turbulent and often violent place. The Merovingian kings were constantly at war with each other, and the kingdom was plagued by political instability and social unrest. However, the Frankish kingdom was also a place of great cultural and religious vitality. The Irish and Anglo-Saxon monks who came to the continent as missionaries found a receptive audience among the Franks, and they established a network of monasteries that would become centers of learning and culture. The Frankish kingdom was also the birthplace of the Carolingian Renaissance, the great cultural and intellectual revival that took place under the patronage of Charlemagne in the 8th and 9th centuries. The Carolingian Renaissance was a testament to the enduring legacy of medieval scholars who kept the flame of learning alive in the darkest of times, laying the foundations for the intellectual and cultural development of the High Middle Ages. The Venerable Bede was a towering intellectual figure of the early Middle Ages, a man whose life and work represent the culmination of the intellectual currents that had been flowing from Ireland and Rome into the Anglo-Saxon world. His writings, which cover a vast range of subjects, from theology and history to science and poetry, would become a cornerstone of medieval learning for centuries to come. Bede was not only a preserver of knowledge but also a creator of knowledge, a man who made original and lasting contributions to a wide range of fields. Bede's life was a quiet and uneventful one, spent almost entirely within the walls of the monastery of Monkwearmouth Jarrow in Northumbria. He was born in 673 on the monastery's lands, and at the age of 7, he was sent to be educated by the monks. He was a precocious student, and he quickly mastered the curriculum of the monastic school, which was based on the 7 liberal arts. He also became a skilled linguist, with a knowledge of Latin, Greek, and Hebrew. Bede was ordained a deacon at the age of 19 and a priest at the age of 30. He spent the rest of his life as a teacher, writer, and scholar, and it appears that he rarely left his monastery. His world was a small one, but his mind was vast. He had access to one of the finest libraries in Europe, a collection of books painstakingly assembled by the founders of his monastery, Benedict Biscop and Ceolfrid. This library, which contained works from Ireland, Rome, and the continent, provided Bede with a comprehensive education in both sacred and secular learning. Bede's most famous work is his Historia Ecclesiastica Gentis Anglorum, Ecclesiastical History of the English People, a masterpiece of historical writing that recounts the story of the Anglo-Saxons' conversion to Christianity. The Historia Ecclesiastica is a remarkable achievement, not only for its engaging narrative and its vivid portrayal of the personalities and events of the period, but also for its sophisticated use of sources and its critical approach to historical evidence. Bede was a meticulous historian, and he took great care to consult a wide range of written and oral sources, to weigh their reliability, and to distinguish between fact and hearsay. He was also a pioneer in the use of footnotes, frequently citing his sources in the margins of his manuscripts. His work set a new standard for historical writing in the Middle Ages, and it remains an indispensable source for our understanding of early Anglo-Saxon England. Bede was not only a historian, but also a scientist. He was a pioneer in the field of computus, the science of calculating the date of Easter.
The date of Easter was a significant source of controversy in the early Middle Ages, having divided the Irish and Roman churches for centuries.
Bede, with his profound knowledge of astronomy and mathematics, developed a new and more accurate method for calculating the date of Easter, a method that the entire Western Church eventually adopted. Bede also wrote several other scientific works, including a treatise on the nature of things, in which he discussed a wide range of topics, from the creation of the world to the movements of the planets. He was a man deeply interested in the natural world, and he believed that studying nature could lead to a deeper understanding of God.
Bede's influence on the intellectual life of the Middle Ages was immense.
His writings were copied and studied in monasteries throughout Europe, and they became standard textbooks in the monastic and cathedral schools. He was, in the words of one modern historian, the schoolmaster of the Middle Ages, a figure who not only preserved the learning of the past but also shaped the intellectual landscape of the future. Bede was a man who embodied the best of the medieval scholarly tradition. He was a man of deep faith and profound learning, dedicated to pursuing knowledge and serving God. He was a quiet hero of a forgotten age, a man who helped to keep the flame of learning alive in the darkest of times. Just as the intellectual and cultural life of Western Europe was beginning to recover from the long decline that followed the fall of the Roman Empire, a new and terrifying threat emerged from the north. The Viking Age, which spanned from the late 8th to the late 11th centuries, was a period of intense and widespread raiding, trading, and settlement by the seafaring peoples of Scandinavia. The Vikings were superb sailors and fierce warriors. Their longships, which could navigate both the open sea and the shallow rivers of Europe, allowed them to strike with devastating speed and surprise. The impact of the Viking Age on the political, social, and the cultural life of Europe was profound, posing a grave new threat to the fragile infrastructure of knowledge preservation painstakingly built up over the preceding centuries. The monasteries, which had become the primary centers of learning and culture in the early Middle Ages, were a favorite target of the Viking raiders. The monasteries were often situated in isolated coastal areas or on islands, making them vulnerable to sea attacks. They were also wealthy institutions, and their churches were filled with precious objects made of gold, silver, and jewels. The Vikings, a pagan people, had no compunction about plundering these Christian holy sites. The first recorded Viking raid on a monastery took place in 793, when a band of raiders attacked the monastery of Lindisfarne, situated off the coast of Northumbria. The attack on Lindisfarne sent a shockwave through Europe. The monastery, founded by Irish monks in the 7th century, was one of the most important centers of learning and culture in the Anglo-Saxon world. It was the home of the Lindisfarne Gospels, one of the most beautiful illuminated manuscripts of the early Middle Ages. The Vikings ransacked the monastery, killed many of the monks, and carried off its treasures. The attack on Lindisfarne was a brutal and sacrilegious act, and it marked the beginning of a new and terrifying chapter in the history of early medieval Europe. The destruction of monasteries and the loss of manuscripts was a significant blow to the preservation of knowledge in the early Middle Ages. The scriptoria of the monasteries, where monks had toiled for centuries to copy and preserve the works of the past, were destroyed, and their precious libraries were set ablaze. The library of the Cathedral of York, which had been one of the finest in Europe, was destroyed by the Vikings in 867. The loss of these libraries was a cultural catastrophe. It meant that many of the great works of classical and Christian literature were lost forever, setting back the cause of learning in Europe for generations. The Viking raids also had a devastating impact on the intellectual life of the monasteries. The constant threat of attack made it difficult for the monks to carry on their work of scholarship and teaching. Many monasteries were abandoned, and the monks who survived were forced to relocate to safer areas. Despite the devastation caused by the Viking raids, the monastic tradition proved to be remarkably resilient. The monks who survived the attacks often returned to their ruined monasteries and began the slow and arduous process of rebuilding. They also developed new strategies for protecting their precious manuscripts. They built fortified towers, or round towers, in which they could store their books and take refuge during a raid. They also began to make multiple copies of their most important manuscripts, and they sent these copies to other monasteries for safekeeping. The Viking Age was a time of great trial and tribulation for medieval scholars, but it was also a time of great courage and resilience. The monks who lived through this period were the unsung heroes of the early Middle Ages, the silent guardians of a precious intellectual legacy. They refused to let the flame of learning be extinguished, and they passed that flame on to succeeding generations, a gift of incalculable value. The story of knowledge preservation in the Middle Ages is often told as a story of men. It is a story of monks in their scriptoria, of scholars in their universities, and of patrons in their courts. But this is only half the story. Women also played a vital, if often overlooked, role in the intellectual and cultural life of the Middle Ages. They were not merely passive consumers of knowledge, they were also active producers of knowledge, making significant contributions to a diverse range of fields, including theology, philosophy, science, and literature. The primary sphere of female intellectual activity in the Middle Ages was the convent. Convents, like monasteries, were centers of learning and culture, providing women with opportunities to receive an education and pursue a life of scholarship. The nuns who lived in these convents were often highly educated women, skilled in reading, writing, and the liberal arts. They had access to libraries, and they were able to engage in the same kind of scholarly activities as their male counterparts. They copied manuscripts, wrote commentaries on the Bible, and composed original works of theology, history, and poetry. One of the most remarkable female scholars of the Middle Ages was Hildegard of Bingen. Hildegard was a 12th-century German Benedictine abbess. She was a visionary, a mystic, a composer, and a writer, producing a vast body of work on a wide range of subjects. She wrote theological treatises, in which she explored the mysteries of the divine and the nature of the human soul. She wrote scientific works in which she described the natural world with a keen and observant eye. She also wrote a musical drama, the Ordo Virtutum, which is one of the earliest known examples of a morality play. Hildegard was a woman of extraordinary intellectual and creative gifts, and she was a significant figure in the intellectual and cultural life of the 12th century. Another crucial female writer of the Middle Ages was Christine de Pizan. Christine was an Italian-born French writer who lived in the 14th and 15th centuries. She was one of the first women in Europe to earn a living as a professional writer, producing a substantial and diverse body of work that encompassed poetry, prose, and political treatises. Her most famous work is the Book of the City of Ladies, a powerful and eloquent defense of women against the misogynistic attacks of her male contemporaries. In the Book of the City of Ladies, Christine constructs a symbolic city of ladies, a city populated by famous and virtuous women from history and mythology. The book is a testament to Christine's learning, her wit, and her passionate commitment to the cause of women. The stories of Hildegard of Bingen and Christine de Pizan are a powerful reminder that the intellectual and cultural life of the Middle Ages was not an exclusively male domain. Women were not just the passive recipients of knowledge, they were also active and creative participants in the great intellectual and cultural debates of their time. They were scholars, writers, and artists who made a significant and lasting contribution to the preservation and transmission of knowledge in the Middle Ages. Their voices, which have been silenced for too long, are an essential part of the story of medieval scholars, the unsung heroes who kept the flame of learning alive in the darkest of times. The scriptorium, or writing room, was the heart of the medieval monastery. It was here that the monks carried out their most crucial task, copying and preserving manuscripts. The scriptorium was a place of silence and concentration, a place where the rustle of parchment and the scratching of quills were the only sounds to be heard. The work of the scribe was arduous and demanding, but it was also a sacred duty, a form of manual labor that was both spiritually edifying and intellectually demanding. The process of creating a manuscript was lengthy and complex, involving a wide range of skills and materials. The first step was to prepare the parchment. Parchment was made from the skins of animals, usually sheep, goats, or calves. The skins were soaked in lime, scraped to remove the hair and flesh, and then stretched on a frame to dry. The result was a smooth and durable writing surface that could last for centuries. The next step was to rule the parchment. The scribe would use a sharp-pointed instrument to create a series of faint lines on the page, which would serve as a guide for the writing. The scribe would then begin the slow and painstaking process of copying the text. The scribe would use a quill pen, made from the feather of a goose or a swan, and a variety of inks created from natural materials such as oak galls, iron salts, and carbon. The life of a scribe was a difficult one. The scriptorium was often cold and drafty, and the scribe would have to work for long hours in poor light. The work was also physically demanding. The scribe would have to sit for long periods of time in a cramped and uncomfortable position, and the constant scratching of the quill on the parchment could lead to eye strain and other physical ailments. But the work of the scribe was also a source of great satisfaction. The scribe was not just a copyist, he was also a scholar, an artist, and a guardian of a precious intellectual legacy. The scribe was a vital link in the chain of knowledge transmission, playing a crucial role in preserving Western civilization. The role of the scribe was not limited to the copying of texts. The scribe was also responsible for the decoration of the manuscript. The scribe would often work in collaboration with an illuminator, who was a specialist in the art of manuscript decoration. The illuminator would add intricate borders, decorative initials, and miniature paintings to the manuscript. The result was a work of art that was both beautiful and functional, a testament to the skill and artistry of the individuals who created it. The illuminated manuscript was a symbol of the medieval love of beauty, craftsmanship, and learning. It was a collaborative effort, involving the skills of the parchment maker, the scribe, the illuminator, and the bookbinder. It was a symbol of the enduring power of the written word, a tribute to the medieval scholars who had dedicated their lives to preserving and transmitting knowledge. The intellectual and cultural landscape of the Middle Ages was not a monolithic one. It was a complex and diverse world, with a variety of different religious, political, and cultural traditions. One of the most significant divisions in this world was the one between the Latin West and the Greek East. This division, which had its roots in the political and cultural differences between the two halves of the Roman Empire, was exacerbated by a series of theological and ecclesiastical disputes that culminated in the Great Schism of 1054. The Great Schism was a pivotal moment in the history of Christianity, having a profound impact on the intellectual and cultural life of both the Byzantine Empire and the Latin West. The Great Schism was the formal break of communion between the Eastern Orthodox Church and the Roman Catholic Church. The schism was the culmination of a long process of estrangement between the two churches, a process driven by various factors, including theological differences, liturgical disputes, and political rivalries. The most significant theological issue that divided the two churches was the Filioque clause, a phrase added to the Nicene Creed in the West, which stated that the Holy Spirit proceeded from both the Father and the Son. The Eastern Church rejected this addition, arguing that it was a violation of the traditional understanding of the Trinity. The two churches also differed on several other issues, including the authority of the Pope, the use of unleavened bread in the Eucharist, and the requirement of clerical celibacy. The Great Schism had a profound impact on the intellectual and cultural life of both the Byzantine Empire and the Latin West. In the East, the schism led to a period of intellectual and cultural isolation. The Byzantine Empire, which had been the center of the Christian world for centuries, became increasingly isolated from the intellectual and cultural developments taking place in the West. The Byzantines continued to preserve and study the works of the ancient Greeks, but they did so in a spirit of conservatism and tradition. They were less open to new ideas and less willing to engage in the critical and creative dialogue with the past that was taking place in the universities of the West. In the West, the Great Schism had a more complex and ambiguous impact. On the one hand, the schism created a new sense of cultural and religious identity in the West. The Latin Church, under the leadership of the Pope, became a more centralized and powerful institution, playing a crucial role in the political and cultural life of the High Middle Ages. On the other hand, the schism also created a new barrier to the transmission of knowledge from the Greek East to the Latin West. The Byzantine Empire was an excellent repository of Greek learning, and the schism made it more difficult for Western scholars to access this precious intellectual heritage. The translation of Greek works into Latin, a significant feature of the Carolingian Renaissance, slowed to a trickle after the schism. It was not until the 12th and 13th centuries, with the rise of the universities and the new translation centers in Spain and Sicily, that the West would once again have direct access to the full range of Greek science and philosophy. The Great Schism was a profound tragedy for the Christian world, having a lasting impact on the intellectual and cultural history of Europe. It created a deep and enduring division between the Latin West and the Greek East, a division that would have far-reaching consequences for the future of European civilization. But the story of the Great Schism is also a reminder of the resilience of the human spirit and the enduring power of the quest for knowledge. Despite the divisions and conflicts, scholars of the Middle Ages, both in the East and the West, continued to preserve and study the intellectual heritage of the past. They were the guardians of a precious flame, and they passed that flame on to succeeding generations, a gift of incalculable value. The life of a medieval monk was highly structured and disciplined, governed by the rhythmic cycle of prayer, work, and study. The rule of Saint Benedict, the most influential monastic rule in the West, outlined a detailed and comprehensive plan for the daily life of a monk. The rule was a masterpiece of practical wisdom, creating a stable and ordered environment in which the monastic community could flourish. The life of a monk was not an easy one, but it was a life of purpose and meaning, dedicated to serving God and pursuing spiritual perfection. The monastic day was punctuated by a series of 8 canonical hours, or services of prayer, which were held in the monastery church. The first of these services, vigils, was held in the early hours of the morning, around 2 or 3 a.m. The monks would rise from their beds and make their way to the cold and dark church, where they would chant the psalms and listen to readings from the Bible. The other services were held at regular intervals throughout the day, from lauds at sunrise to compline at sunset. The canonical hours were the heart of the monastic day, providing a constant and unwavering rhythm to the community's life. In addition to prayer, the monks were also required to engage in manual labor. The rule of Saint Benedict states that idleness is the enemy of the soul, and it emphasizes that monks should be continually engaged in some form of practical work. The type of work that the monks performed varied from monastery to monastery, but it often included farming, gardening, cooking, and cleaning. The monasteries were self-sufficient communities, and they had to produce everything that they needed to survive, from food and clothing to tools and furniture. The manual labor of the monks was not just a practical necessity, it was also a spiritual discipline, a way of humbling the body and focusing the mind. The third pillar of the monastic life was study. The rule of Saint Benedict required the monks to spend several hours each day in reading and contemplation. This practice, known as lectio divina, or divine reading, was a slow and meditative form of reading, in which the monk would savor each word and reflect on its meaning. The primary text for lectio divina was the Bible, but the monks also read the writings of the Church Fathers and other spiritual authors. The monastery library was the heart of the monastic community, serving as a place where monks could immerse themselves in the intellectual and spiritual traditions of the past. The study of the monks was not just an academic exercise, it was also a form of prayer, a way of seeking a deeper understanding of God and His creation. The life of a medieval monk was a life of balance and moderation. The rule of Saint Benedict struck a careful balance between prayer, work, and study, creating a way of life that was both challenging and sustainable. The monks were not just scholars, they were also farmers, artisans, and administrators. They were part of a community dedicated to preserving knowledge and ensuring the survival of civilization during a time of profound crisis. The monasteries were the great powerhouses of the early Middle Ages, playing a crucial role in the preservation and transmission of the intellectual and cultural heritage of the past. The High Middle Ages were a period of extraordinary intellectual and cultural vitality, marked by the flourishing of universities, a growing population, and an expanding economy. But this period of growth and optimism came to a sudden and catastrophic end in the mid-14th century with the arrival of the Black Death. The Black Death was one of the most devastating pandemics in human history, and it had a profound and lasting impact on the social, economic, and cultural life of Europe. The pandemic was a significant turning point in the history of the Middle Ages, posing a grave new threat to the fragile infrastructure of knowledge preservation painstakingly built up over the preceding centuries. The bacterium responsible for the Black Death was Yersinia pestis, which was spread by fleas that carried it and were transported by rats. The pandemic arrived in Europe in 1347, and it quickly spread across the continent, killing an estimated 30 to 60% of the population. The symptoms of the plague were horrific. Victims would develop large and painful swellings, or buboes, in their lymph nodes, followed by fever, chills, and vomiting. Death would usually follow within a few days. The pandemic was a terrifying and indiscriminate killer, and it struck down people of all ages and social classes, from the highest nobles to the humblest peasants. The impact of the Black Death on the universities was devastating. The universities were located in the heart of the cities, which were the epicenters of the pandemic. Students and masters fled the cities in droves, forcing the universities to close their doors. Many of the leading scholars of the day died in the plague, and the intellectual life of the universities was brought to a standstill. The pandemic also had a significant impact on university curricula. The traditional scholastic curriculum, with its emphasis on logic and metaphysics, seemed increasingly irrelevant in a world that was being ravaged by disease and death. There was a growing interest in medicine and science, accompanied by a new emphasis on practical and empirical knowledge. The social and economic consequences of the Black Death were equally profound. The massive loss of life led to a severe labor shortage, which had a significant impact on the feudal system. The peasants, who had for centuries been tied to the land, were now in a much stronger bargaining position. They were able to demand higher wages and better working conditions, allowing many to leave the manors and seek new opportunities in the cities. The Black Death also led to a significant redistribution of wealth. The land and property of the victims of the plague were inherited by their survivors, which led to a new and more fluid social structure. The old feudal order, with its rigid hierarchy of lords and vassals, began to break down, and a new, more dynamic society emerged. The Black Death was a traumatic and transformative event in the history of Europe. It was a period of immense suffering and loss, yet also marked by significant social and cultural transformation. The pandemic marked a significant turning point in the history of the Middle Ages, with a profound and lasting impact on Europe's intellectual and cultural life. The scholars who lived through this period were compelled to grapple with new and challenging questions and to reassess their understanding of the world. The Black Death was a dark and challenging chapter in the history of medieval scholars. Still, it was also a chapter that was marked by resilience, creativity, and a renewed commitment to the pursuit of knowledge. The fall of Constantinople to the Ottoman Turks in 1453 marked a watershed moment in European history. It marked the end of the Byzantine Empire, the last remnant of the Roman Empire, sending a shockwave through the Christian world. The fall of the city was a significant blow to the morale of Christendom, and it had a profound and lasting impact on the political, economic, and cultural life of Europe. However, the fall of Constantinople also had an unintended and paradoxical consequence. It provided a significant boost to the intellectual and cultural revival that was already underway in Italy, a revival that we now refer to as the Renaissance. The fall of Constantinople led to a mass exodus of Greek scholars from the city. These scholars, heirs to a long and distinguished tradition of classical learning, fled to the West, taking with them their precious manuscripts and deep knowledge of the Greek language and literature. They were welcomed in the cities of Italy, which were in the midst of a great cultural and artistic flowering. The Italian humanists, who were already passionate about the rediscovery of classical antiquity, were eager to learn from these Greek scholars, and they provided them with patronage and support. The arrival of the Greek scholars in Italy had a transformative impact on the intellectual life of the Renaissance. It led to a new and more profound understanding of the classical world, sparking a renewed interest in the study of the Greek language and literature. The Italian humanists, who had previously relied on Latin translations of Greek works, were now able to read the great works of Greek philosophy, science, and literature in their original language. This direct access to the sources of classical learning had a profound and liberating effect on the intellectual life of the Renaissance. It led to a more critical engagement with the past and fostered a new spirit of inquiry and innovation. The Greek scholars also brought with them a large number of Byzantine manuscripts, which were a treasure trove of classical learning. These manuscripts, preserved in the libraries of Constantinople for centuries, contained many works lost to the West, such as the complete works of Plato and the great tragedies of Sophocles and Euripides. The rediscovery of these works had a profound impact on the intellectual and cultural life of the Renaissance. It led to a new and more nuanced understanding of the classical world, inspiring a new generation of writers, artists, and thinkers. The fall of Constantinople was a tragic event, but it also catalyzed change. It was a moment when the intellectual and cultural traditions of the Greek East and the Latin West came together in a new and creative synthesis. The Greek scholars who fled to Italy were the last of the medieval scholars, the final link in a long chain of knowledge transmission that stretched back to the ancient world. They were the guardians of a precious flame, passing it on to the humanists of the Renaissance, who would use it to ignite a new and brilliant chapter in the history of European civilization. The story of the medieval scholars is a story of the painstaking and laborious process of manuscript production. It is a story of monks toiling in their scriptoria for long hours to copy and preserve the works of the past. However, this story reached a dramatic and revolutionary conclusion in the mid-15th century with the invention of the printing press. The printing press was one of the most significant inventions in human history, having a profound and lasting impact on the intellectual, cultural, and religious life of Europe. It was a technology that would transform the world, bringing the medieval scholars' age to a close. The printing press was invented by Johannes Gutenberg in the German city of Mainz around 1450. Gutenberg's invention was a combination of several existing technologies, including the wine press, the paper mill, and metal casting techniques used to make coins and jewelry. The key innovation of the printing press was the use of movable type, which allowed for the rapid and efficient production of multiple copies of a text. The first book to be printed with movable type was the Gutenberg Bible, a magnificent 2-volume work that was completed in 1455. The Gutenberg Bible was a testament to the power and beauty of the new technology, marking the beginning of a new era in the history of the book. The impact of the printing press on the Renaissance was immense. The printing press enabled the rapid and inexpensive production of books, resulting in a significant increase in the availability of knowledge. The works of the classical authors, which had for centuries been the exclusive preserve of a small and privileged elite, were now available to a much wider audience. The printing press also played a crucial role in the spread of the new ideas of the Renaissance. The works of the humanists, which had previously been circulated in manuscript form, could now be printed and distributed to a mass audience. The printing press was a powerful tool for disseminating knowledge, helping to create a new and more vibrant intellectual culture in Europe. The printing press also played a crucial role in the Protestant Reformation. The Reformation was a religious movement that began in the early 16th century, sparked by the teachings of Martin Luther. Luther was a German monk who challenged the authority of the Pope and the teachings of the Catholic Church. He argued that the Bible was the sole source of religious truth, and he translated it into German so that ordinary people could read it. The printing press played a crucial role in the success of the Reformation. It enabled Luther's writings to be printed and distributed to a mass audience, contributing to the creation of a new and powerful sense of religious identity among the German people. The printing press was a powerful tool in the hands of the reformers, helping to shatter the religious unity that had long characterized Europe. The invention of the printing press was a significant turning point in the history of European civilization. It was a technology that would transform the world, bringing the medieval scholars' age to a close. The scribes who had for centuries toiled in the scriptoria of the monasteries were now replaced by the printers who worked in the bustling print shops of the cities. The manuscript, which had been the primary vehicle for centuries for the transmission of knowledge, was now replaced by the printed book. The age of the medieval scholar was over, but their legacy lived on. The knowledge painstakingly preserved and transmitted by medieval scholars was now available to a broader audience than ever before, becoming the foundation for the intellectual and cultural achievements of the modern world. The sack of Rome by the Visigoths in 410 was a traumatic event that sent shockwaves throughout the Roman world. It was the first time in nearly 800 years that a foreign enemy had captured the city, and it was a powerful symbol of the decline and fall of the Roman Empire. The sack of Rome was not just a military defeat, it was also a psychological blow, a moment when the illusion of Roman invincibility was shattered forever. The event had a profound and lasting impact on the Roman psyche, compelling the people of the Roman world to confront a new and uncertain future. The sack of Rome was the culmination of a long and complex series of events. The Visigoths, under their king Alaric, had been a thorn in the side of the Roman Empire for many years. They had been allowed to settle within the borders of the empire, but they were a restless and ambitious people, constantly demanding more land and money. In 410, after a series of failed negotiations with the Roman authorities, Alaric and his army marched on Rome. The city was poorly defended, and it fell to the Visigoths after a short siege. The Visigoths spent 3 days sacking the city, looting its treasures, and burning its buildings. The sack was a brutal and destructive act, but it was not a complete and utter devastation. The Visigoths were Christians, and they spared the churches of the city. They also allowed many of the city's inhabitants to take refuge in the churches. The historical accounts of the sack of Rome are varied and often contradictory. The pagan historians of the time, such as Zosimus, portrayed the sack as a catastrophic event, a sign of the wrath of the gods and the end of civilization. The Christian historians, such as Orosius and Augustine, had a more nuanced view. They saw the sack as a divine punishment for the sins of the Roman people, but they also saw it as an opportunity for spiritual renewal. Augustine, in his great work The City of God, argued that the fall of Rome was not the end of the world, but rather the beginning of a new and better world, a world in which the city of God would triumph over the city of man. The impact of the sack of Rome on the Roman psyche was profound. The Romans had long believed that their city was eternal, destined to rule the world forever. The sack of the city shattered this belief, forcing the Romans to confront the reality of their own mortality. The event led to a period of intense soul-searching and self-doubt, during which the Romans questioned their own values and identity. The sack of Rome was a traumatic event, but it also catalyzed change. It was a moment when the old world was dying and a new world was struggling to be born. The scholars and thinkers who lived through this period were compelled to grapple with new and challenging questions and to reassess their understanding of the world. The sack of Rome was a dark and challenging chapter in the history of the Roman Empire. Still, it was also a chapter that was marked by resilience, creativity, and a renewed commitment to the pursuit of knowledge. The preservation of knowledge in the Middle Ages was not limited to the works of poets, philosophers, and theologians. It also included the vast and complex body of Roman law, a legal system that was one of the most sophisticated and enduring achievements of the ancient world. The preservation and transmission of Roman law was a major intellectual undertaking, and it had a profound and lasting impact on the legal and political development of Europe. The key figure in this process was the Byzantine Emperor Justinian I, who in the 6th century commissioned a comprehensive compilation of Roman law, a work now known as the Justinian Code. The Justinian Code, also known as the Corpus Juris Civilis, was a massive and ambitious undertaking. It was a systematic and comprehensive compilation of all Roman law, from the earliest days of the Republic to the reign of Justinian himself. The work was divided into 4 parts: the Codex, which was a collection of all the imperial constitutions; the Digest, which was a collection of the writings of the great Roman jurists; the Institutes, which was a textbook for law students; and the Novelli, which was a collection of Justinian's own laws. The compilation of the Justinian Code was a monumental task, and it took a team of legal experts 10 years to complete. The result was a work of extraordinary intellectual and legal sophistication, which would become the foundation for the legal systems of many modern European nations. The Justinian Code was a product of the Byzantine Empire, written in Greek. However, it was also a work that was deeply rooted in the legal traditions of the Roman West. The Roman jurists whose writings were included in the Digest were all from the western half of the empire, and the legal principles that were enshrined in the Justinian Code were the product of a long and distinguished tradition of Roman legal thought. The Justinian Code served as a bridge between the Roman past and the Byzantine present, a work that preserved the legal wisdom of the ancients for a new and evolving world. The influence of the Justinian Code on medieval legal systems was immense. In the East, the Justinian Code remained the basis of Byzantine law until the fall of Constantinople in 1453. In the West, the Justinian Code was lost mainly during the early Middle Ages. The Germanic successor kingdoms had their own distinct legal traditions, and as a result, the study of Roman law declined. However, the Justinian Code was rediscovered in the High Middle Ages, and it had a transformative impact on the legal and political development of Europe. The rediscovery of the Justinian Code led to a revival of the study of Roman law in European universities, providing a new and more sophisticated framework for the development of secular law. The principles of the Justinian Code were incorporated into the legal systems of many European nations, and they continue to influence the legal and political thought of the modern world. The Justinian Code was a testament to the enduring power of Roman law and a tribute to the medieval scholars who dedicated their lives to preserving and transmitting knowledge. The scholars who compiled the Justinian Code were the guardians of a precious legal heritage, passing it on to succeeding generations as a gift of incalculable value. The Justinian Code was a work that would shape the course of European history for centuries to come, and it remains a powerful symbol of the enduring human quest for justice and order. The intellectual and cultural revival of the High Middle Ages was not limited to the universities and the scriptoria. It also found expression in a new and revolutionary style of architecture, the Gothic. The Gothic cathedrals, with their soaring vaults, vast expanses of stained glass, and intricate, delicate tracery, are among the most beautiful and awe-inspiring buildings in the world. They are a testament to the skill, artistry, and faith of the men who built them, and they serve as a powerful symbol of the intellectual and spiritual aspirations of the High Middle Ages. The Gothic style of architecture emerged in the mid-12th century in the Île-de-France, the region around Paris. The first Gothic building was the Abbey Church of St. Denis, which Abbot Suger rebuilt in the 1140s. Suger was a man of great vision and ambition, aiming to create a church worthy of housing the relics of St. Denis, the patron saint of France. He was also a man who was deeply influenced by the Neoplatonic philosophy of Pseudo-Dionysius the Areopagite, a 6th-century Christian mystic who taught that light was a symbol of the divine. Suger wanted to create a church that would be filled with light, a church that would transport the worshipper from the darkness of the material world to the light of the spiritual world. To achieve this vision, Suger and his architects developed a series of structural innovations that would become the defining features of the Gothic style. The most significant of these innovations was the pointed arch, a more efficient and flexible structural element than the round arch characteristic of the Romanesque style. The pointed arch enabled architects to construct taller and more slender buildings, while also allowing them to create larger and more numerous windows. The other key innovations of the Gothic style were the ribbed vault and the flying buttress. The ribbed vault was a system of intersecting arches that allowed the weight of the ceiling to be concentrated on a series of slender piers, rather than on the thick and heavy walls of the Romanesque style. The flying buttress was an external support used to counteract the outward thrust of the vaults, allowing architects to build even taller and more daring structures. The Gothic style of architecture was not merely a matter of structural innovation, it also represented a new approach to thinking about space and light. The Gothic cathedrals were designed to be a total work of art, a carefully orchestrated symphony of architecture, sculpture, and stained glass. The vast expanses of stained glass, depicting scenes from the Bible and the lives of the saints, were not just decorative, they were also a form of visual theology, teaching the illiterate masses the stories of the Christian faith. The light that streamed through the stained glass windows, the light was not only a source of illumination but also a symbol of the divine, a tangible manifestation of God's presence. The relationship between Gothic architecture and scholasticism has been a subject of much debate among art historians. The renowned German art historian Erwin Panofsky argued that a profound and fundamental analogy existed between the two. He argued that both Gothic architecture and scholasticism were based on the same principles of clarity, order, and logical consistency. He saw the Gothic cathedral as a kind of Summa Theologica in stone, a comprehensive and systematic exposition of the Christian faith. Other art historians have challenged Panofsky's thesis, but it remains a robust and influential interpretation of the Gothic style. The Gothic cathedrals, like the great scholastic treatises of the High Middle Ages, were a testament to the intellectual confidence and optimism of the period, a period in which scholars and artists believed that they could reconcile the wisdom of the ancients with the teachings of the Christian faith to create a comprehensive and unified understanding of the universe. The medieval world was a world of symbols, a world in which every object, every event, and every creature was believed to have a deeper, allegorical meaning. This symbolic way of thinking found its most vivid and imaginative expression in the medieval bestiary, a type of book that described the beasts of the world, both real and imaginary, and explained their moral and religious significance. The bestiary was a popular and influential genre in the Middle Ages, offering a fascinating glimpse into the medieval mindset. This mind saw the natural world as a reflection of the divine. The medieval bestiary was not a scientific textbook, it was a work of theology and moral instruction. The authors of the bestiaries were not interested in providing a factual and objective description of the animal kingdom. They were interested in using the animals as a vehicle for teaching Christian doctrine and morality. Each animal in the bestiary was given a symbolic meaning, and its behavior was interpreted as an allegory of some aspect of the Christian faith. The lion, for example, was a symbol of Christ, because it was believed that the lion slept with its eyes open, just as Christ was believed to have been physically dead but spiritually alive in the tomb. The pelican was also a symbol of Christ, because it was believed that the pelican would pierce its own breast to feed its young with its blood, just as Christ shed his blood to save humanity. A host of fantastic and imaginary creatures, such as the unicorn, the dragon, and the phoenix, also populated the bestiaries. These creatures, which were drawn from classical mythology and folklore, were given a new Christian meaning in the bestiaries. The unicorn, a fierce and untamable creature that could only be captured by a virgin, symbolized Christ, who was born of a virgin and captured and crucified by his enemies. The dragon, a powerful and malevolent creature, was a symbol of the devil, the great enemy of God and humanity. The phoenix, a mythical bird believed to live for 500 years and then be reborn from its own ashes, was a symbol of Christ's resurrection. The medieval bestiary was a product of a world in which the natural and the supernatural were inextricably intertwined. It was a world in which the boundaries between the real and the imaginary were fluid and permeable. The authors of the bestiaries were not trying to deceive their readers, they were attempting to reveal a more profound truth, one that could only be expressed through the language of symbols and allegory. The bestiaries were a testament to the medieval love of wonder and mystery, serving as a powerful tool for teaching the illiterate masses the stories and doctrines of the Christian faith. The bestiaries were a vital part of the intellectual and cultural life of the Middle Ages, providing a fascinating insight into the medieval imagination, which viewed the world as a book written by the hand of God. The medieval world was a world of symbols, a world in which every object, every event, and every creature was believed to have a deeper, allegorical meaning. This symbolic way of thinking found its most vivid and imaginative expression in the medieval Mappa Mundi, or world map. The Mappa Mundi was not a navigational tool, it was a work of theology and moral instruction, a symbolic representation of the world designed to teach the illiterate masses the stories and doctrines of the Christian faith. The medieval Mappa Mundi was a distinctly different kind of map from the ones we are accustomed to today. It was not based on a scientific and objective survey of the world, it was based on a religious and symbolic understanding of the world. The Mappa Mundi was typically a circular map, with Jerusalem at the center and the east at the top. The world was divided into 3 continents, Asia, Europe, and Africa. Asia was at the top of the map, and it was the largest of the 3 continents. Europe was on the left, and Africa was on the right. The 3 continents were separated by a T-shaped body of water, formed by the Mediterranean Sea, the Nile River, and the Danube River. The Mappa Mundi was not only a geographical representation of the world, but also a historical and theological representation of it. The map was filled with images and symbols that told the story of human history, from the creation of the world to the Last Judgment. The Garden of Eden was located at the top of the map, in the Far East. The Tower of Babel was located in the land of Shinar, in the heart of Asia. The life of Christ was depicted in a series of scenes that were scattered across the map. The Last Judgment was depicted at the top of the map, with Christ enthroned in majesty, surrounded by the angels and the saints. The most famous and spectacular of the medieval Mappa Mundi is the Hereford Mappa Mundi, created in the late 13th century. The Hereford Mappa Mundi is a vast and complex work of art, a veritable encyclopedia of medieval knowledge and expertise. The map is drawn on a single sheet of vellum, filled with a bewildering array of images and symbols. The map depicts the known world, from the British Isles in the west to the land of the dog-headed men in the east. It also depicts a host of fantastic and imaginary creatures, such as the unicorn, the dragon, and the phoenix. The Hereford Mappa Mundi is a testament to medieval fascination with wonder and mystery, serving as a powerful tool for teaching the illiterate masses the stories and doctrines of the Christian faith. The medieval Mappa Mundi was a product of a world in which the natural and the supernatural were inextricably intertwined. It was a world in which the boundaries between the real and the imaginary were fluid and permeable. The authors of the Mappa Mundi were not trying to deceive their readers, they were attempting to reveal a more profound truth, one that could only be expressed through the language of symbols and allegory. The Mappa Mundi was a vital part of the intellectual and cultural life of the Middle Ages, providing a fascinating insight into the medieval imagination, which viewed the world as a book written by the hand of God. The story of knowledge preservation in the Middle Ages is a story of cross-cultural exchange and collaboration. It is a story of how different religious and cultural traditions came together to preserve and transmit the intellectual heritage of the past. One of the most critical and often overlooked chapters in this story is the role of Jewish scholars in the translation movement that took place in medieval Spain. The Jewish scholars of Spain were a vital link in the chain of knowledge transmission, playing a crucial role in disseminating Greco-Arabic science and philosophy to the Latin West. Medieval Spain was a unique and vibrant cultural crossroads, a place where Christians, Jews, and Muslims lived and worked together in a complex and often fraught relationship. The Muslim-ruled parts of Spain, known as Al-Andalus, were a major center of learning and culture, and they were home to a flourishing Jewish community. The Jews of Al-Andalus were deeply integrated into the intellectual and cultural life of the Muslim world, and they were fluent in both Arabic and Hebrew. They were also familiar with the great works of Greco-Arabic science and philosophy, which were not yet available in the Latin West. The Christian reconquest of Spain, which began in the 11th century, created a new and dynamic cultural environment. The Christian rulers of Spain were eager to acquire the knowledge of the Muslim world, and they established a series of translation centers, most notably in the city of Toledo. These translation centers were a meeting place for scholars from all three religious traditions, and they were the site of a massive and systematic effort to translate the great works of Greco-Arabic science and philosophy into Latin. The Jewish scholars of Spain played a crucial role in this translation movement. They often served as intermediaries between Arabic-speaking Muslim scholars and Latin-speaking Christian scholars. They would first translate a text from Arabic into the local Romance vernacular, and then a Christian scholar would translate the vernacular text into Latin. The Jewish scholars of Spain were not just translators, they were also original thinkers and writers. They made significant contributions to a diverse range of fields, including philosophy, theology, science, and medicine. One of the most important Jewish scholars of medieval Spain was Moses Maimonides, a 12th-century philosopher, physician, and jurist. Maimonides was a towering intellectual figure, and his work had a profound and lasting impact on both Jewish and Christian thought. His most famous work, The Guide for the Perplexed, is a brilliant and sophisticated attempt to reconcile the teachings of the Bible with the philosophy of Aristotle. Maimonides was a man who embodied the best of the Jewish intellectual tradition, and he was a powerful symbol of the creative and fruitful dialogue that took place between the different religious and cultural traditions of medieval Spain. The Jewish scholars of medieval Spain were the guardians of a precious intellectual heritage, and they played a pivotal role in transmitting that heritage to the Latin West. They were a vital link in the chain of knowledge transmission, helping to lay the foundations for the intellectual and cultural revival of the High Middle Ages and the Renaissance. The story of the Jewish scholars of medieval Spain is a powerful reminder that the preservation of knowledge is a collaborative and cross-cultural endeavor. The contributions of people from diverse backgrounds and traditions enrich this process. The curriculum of the medieval university was highly structured and systematic, based on the traditional framework of the 7 liberal arts. The 7 liberal arts were a set of subjects considered essential for a free person to know to participate actively in civic life. They were divided into 2 parts, the trivium and the quadrivium. The trivium, which consisted of grammar, rhetoric, and logic, was the foundation of the curriculum. It was designed to provide students with the basic tools of literacy and critical thinking. The quadrivium, which consisted of arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy, was the more advanced part of the curriculum. It was designed to provide students with a more specialized knowledge of the natural world. The trivium was the heart of the medieval curriculum, serving as the foundation for all other learning. Grammar was the study of language, designed to teach students how to read, write, and speak with clarity and precision. Rhetoric was the art of persuasion, designed to teach students how to construct a convincing argument and speak with eloquence and force. Logic was the science of reasoning, designed to teach students how to think critically, identify fallacies, and construct a valid argument. The trivium was a powerful tool for developing the mind, providing students with the intellectual skills necessary to succeed in all other fields of study. The quadrivium was the more advanced part of the medieval curriculum, designed to provide students with specialized knowledge of the natural world. Arithmetic was the study of numbers, and it was the foundation for all the other mathematical sciences. Geometry was the study of space and served as the foundation for the study of architecture and engineering. Music was the study of harmony and proportion, and it was considered to be a mathematical science. Astronomy was the study of the heavens, and it was the most prestigious of the mathematical sciences. The quadrivium was a powerful tool for exploring the natural world, providing students with a deeper understanding of the universe's order and harmony. The 7 liberal arts were not just a set of subjects to be mastered, they were also a way of thinking, a way of approaching the world. They were designed to cultivate a love of learning, a spirit of inquiry, and a commitment to the pursuit of truth. The medieval university was a place where students were taught not only what to think but also how to think. They were taught to question, to challenge, and to argue. They were taught to think for themselves and take an active, responsible role in the intellectual and cultural life of their time. The 7 liberal arts served as the foundation for the intellectual and cultural achievements of the High Middle Ages, laying the groundwork for the scientific revolution and the advancements of the modern world. The medieval world was a highly ordered and hierarchical one, where everyone had a specific place and role to play. This social order was often described in terms of the 3 estates: those who pray, those who fight, and those who work. This tripartite model of society was a powerful and enduring one, shaping the social, political, and cultural life of the Middle Ages. Medieval scholars, who were part of the First Estate, were not only preservers of knowledge but also active participants in the social and political life of their time. Their work was often shaped by the values and assumptions inherent in the 3 estates model. The First Estate was the clergy, or those who pray. The clergy were the spiritual leaders of medieval society, responsible for the spiritual well-being of their communities and the salvation of souls. They were a diverse group, ranging from the Pope and the bishops at the top to the humble parish priests at the bottom. The clergy were the most educated members of medieval society, serving as both primary producers and consumers of knowledge. The monasteries and the universities, which were the main centers of learning in the Middle Ages, were both clerical institutions. The work of medieval scholars was viewed as a form of prayer, a means of serving God and the Church. The Second Estate was the nobility, or those who fought in battle. The nobility were the military and political leaders of medieval society, responsible for the defense of the realm. They were a warrior class, and their lives were governed by a code of chivalry that emphasized courage, honor, and loyalty. The nobility were also the principal patrons of art and culture in the Middle Ages. They commissioned the building of magnificent castles and cathedrals, and they supported the work of poets, musicians, and artists. The nobility were not just warriors, they were also a cultured and sophisticated elite, playing a crucial role in the intellectual and cultural life of their time. The Third Estate was the peasantry, or those who work. The peasantry comprised the vast majority of the population in the Middle Ages, and they were primarily responsible for producing food and other essential goods and services. They were a diverse group, ranging from the free peasants who owned their own land to the serfs who were tied to the land and were the property of their lords. The life of a peasant was a harsh and difficult one, often marked by poverty, disease, and famine. However, the peasantry were not merely passive victims of circumstance, they were also a resilient and resourceful people, playing a crucial role in the economic and social life of the Middle Ages. The Three Estates model was powerful and enduring, but it was also highly idealized. It did not always reflect the complex and messy reality of medieval society. There was considerable social mobility in the Middle Ages, and people could and did move between the various estates. The rise of the cities and the growth of a new merchant class also challenged the traditional tripartite model of society. However, the Three Estates model remained a powerful and influential one, shaping the way people in the Middle Ages thought about themselves and their world. Medieval scholars, who were part of the First Estate, were not only preservers of knowledge but also active participants in the social and political life of their time. Their work was often shaped by the values and assumptions inherent in the three estates model. The medieval world was a realm of wonder and mystery, a place where the boundaries between the natural and the supernatural were fluid and permeable. This sense of wonder and mystery found its most vivid and imaginative expression in the practice of alchemy. This complex and multifaceted tradition combined elements of science, philosophy, and mysticism. The alchemists were the great experimenters of the Middle Ages, and their quest for the philosopher's stone, a mythical substance believed to have the power to transmute base metals into gold and grant eternal life, was a powerful symbol of human desire for knowledge and transformation. Alchemy was not just a pseudoscience, it was a serious and sophisticated intellectual tradition, with its own body of texts, its own set of theories, and its own experimental methods. The alchemists were not just charlatans and fools, they were also serious and dedicated scholars, who were deeply committed to the pursuit of knowledge. They were the heirs to a long and distinguished tradition of chemical and metallurgical experimentation, a tradition that stretched back to the ancient world. They were also pioneers of a new and more experimental approach to studying nature, an approach that would eventually lead to the development of modern chemistry. The central goal of alchemy was the transmutation of metals, specifically the transformation of base metals, such as lead and iron, into noble metals, including gold and silver. The alchemists believed that all metals were composed of the same basic elements and that it was possible to change one metal into another by altering the proportion of these elements. The key to this process was the philosopher's stone, a mythical substance believed to possess the power to perfect all matter. The quest for the philosopher's stone was a lengthy and arduous endeavor, involving a wide range of chemical and metallurgical experiments. The alchemists would spend long hours in their laboratories, heating, distilling, and combining a variety of different substances, in the hope of discovering the secret of transmutation. The quest for the philosopher's stone was not only a scientific and technological endeavor, but also a spiritual and mystical one. The alchemists believed that the process of transmutation was not only physical but also spiritual in nature. They believed that the alchemist had to be a person of great moral and spiritual purity, and that the process of transmutation was a means of purifying both the soul and the body. The philosopher's stone was not just a substance that could turn lead into gold, it was also a symbol of spiritual enlightenment, representing the human quest for perfection and immortality. Alchemy was a complex and multifaceted tradition that had a profound and lasting impact on the intellectual and cultural life of the Middle Ages. The alchemists were the great experimenters of their time, and their work laid the foundations for the development of modern chemistry. They were also the guardians of a precious intellectual and spiritual heritage, a heritage that stretched back to the ancient world. The story of the alchemists serves as a potent reminder that the quest for knowledge is a complex and often mysterious endeavor, one that involves not just the mind but also the heart and the soul. The High Middle Ages were a period of great cultural and artistic flowering, a time when new forms of literature, music, and art emerged. One of the most important and influential of these new forms was the literature of courtly love, a complex and sophisticated code of conduct that governed the relations between aristocratic men and women. The literature of courtly love was a powerful and enduring phenomenon, having a profound and lasting impact on the social, cultural, and emotional life of the Middle Ages. It was a literature that celebrated the power of love, the beauty of women, and the ennobling and transformative power of desire. The origins of courtly love are complex and subject to much debate. It is a product of various influences, including the love poetry of the Arab world, the Neoplatonic philosophy of ancient Greece, and the cult of the Virgin Mary. The immediate origins of courtly love, however, are to be found in the courts of southern France in the 12th century. The most important of these courts was the court of Eleanor of Aquitaine, one of the most powerful and influential women of the Middle Ages. Eleanor was a great patron of the arts, surrounding herself with a circle of poets and musicians who created a new and sophisticated culture of love. The literature of courtly love was highly stylized and conventionalized. It was a literature of unrequited love, a literature in which the lover, who was typically a young and unmarried knight, would devote himself to the service of a noble and unattainable lady, who was typically the wife of his lord. The lover would perform great deeds of chivalry in the name of his lady, and he would compose poems and songs in her honor. The love of the knight for his lady was a secret and a forbidden one, and it was a love that was never to be consummated. The goal of courtly love was not marriage or physical intimacy, it was the spiritual and moral ennoblement of the lover. The role of women in courtly love was a complex and ambiguous one. On the one hand, the lady was the object of the lover's devotion, and she was placed on a pedestal of idealized perfection. She was the source of all that was good and beautiful in the world, and she was the inspiration for the lover's heroic deeds. On the other hand, the lady was also a passive and objectified figure, a prize to be won by the most valiant and the most eloquent of her suitors. The literature of courtly love was a literature that was written by men and for men, and it often reflected the patriarchal and misogynistic assumptions of the time. The literature of courtly love was powerful and enduring, profoundly impacting the Western tradition of love and romance. It was a literature that celebrated the power of love, the beauty of women, and the ennobling and transformative power of desire. It was also a literature that was full of contradictions and ambiguities, reflecting the complex and often contradictory attitudes of the Middle Ages towards love, sex, and marriage. The literature of courtly love was a vital part of the intellectual and cultural life of the High Middle Ages, providing a fascinating insight into the medieval imagination, an imagination capable of creating a world of both idealized beauty and profound emotional complexity. The medieval world was a world deeply conscious of its own past, a world in which the past was not just a collection of dead facts, but a living and vital presence. The medieval conception of history was profoundly theological, a perspective in which the course of human events was viewed as a manifestation of the divine will. Medieval historians, who were typically monks or clerics, were not just chroniclers of events, they were also theologians and moralists who sought to understand the meaning and purpose of history. Their work was a form of spiritual and intellectual inquiry, a way of discerning the hand of God in the unfolding drama of human history. The primary form of historical writing in the Middle Ages was the chronicle. The chronicle was a year-by-year account of events, a detailed and continuous record of the past. The chronicles were often written in monasteries, resulting from a lengthy and meticulous process of compilation and composition. The chroniclers would draw on a wide range of sources, including earlier chronicles, saints' lives, and oral traditions. They would also add their own observations and interpretations, often shaping their narratives to fit a particular theological or political agenda. The medieval conception of history was linear and teleological in nature. It was a conception in which history was viewed as a linear progression, moving from the creation of the world to the Last Judgment. The central event in this historical drama was the incarnation of Christ, which was regarded as a pivotal turning point in history. The time before Christ was a period of preparation, a time when the world was awaiting the coming of the Savior. The time after Christ was a period of fulfillment, when the salvation won by Christ was being worked out in the life of the Church. Medieval historians were not just interested in the past for its own sake, they also saw it as a source of moral and spiritual guidance. They believed that history was a great teacher, a mirror in which they could see the consequences of human sin and the power of divine grace. The stories of the saints and the sinners, the heroes and the villains, were all seen as a source of moral and spiritual guidance. Medieval historians were not only trying to record the past, but also to shape the present and the future. They were striving to create a vision of a just and holy society, a society that would reflect the kingdom of God. The medieval conception of history was powerful and enduring, profoundly impacting the Western tradition of historical writing. Medieval historians were the guardians of a precious intellectual and spiritual heritage, and they passed that heritage on to succeeding generations, a gift of incalculable value. The story of the medieval historians is a powerful reminder that the study of the past is not just an academic exercise, it is also a moral and a spiritual one, a way of understanding ourselves and our place in the world. The medieval world was filled with music, a realm in which it was not just a form of entertainment but a vital part of the intellectual, cultural, and religious life of the time. Medieval scholars, who were the guardians of the intellectual heritage of the past, were also pioneers of a new and revolutionary form of music. This form would transform the sound of Western civilization. The development of polyphony and the invention of musical notation were two of the most significant and enduring achievements of the Middle Ages, testifying to the creativity, ingenuity, and spiritual aspirations of medieval scholars. The primary center of musical innovation in the Middle Ages was the church. The music of the church, known as plain chant or Gregorian chant, was a form of monophonic music, characterized by a single melody sung by all voices in unison. Plain chant was a simple yet beautiful form of music, serving as the perfect vehicle for expressing the religious sentiments of the time. But the medieval musicians were not content with the simplicity of plain chant. They were driven by a desire to create a more complex and expressive form of music, a form that would be a more fitting tribute to the glory of God. The result of this desire was the development of polyphony, a form of music in which two or more independent melodic lines are combined. The earliest form of polyphony was organum, a musical technique in which a second voice was added to a plain chant melody, moving in parallel motion with the original melody. Over time, polyphony became increasingly complex, and composers of the High Middle Ages, such as Léonin and Periton of the Notre Dame School in Paris, created vast and intricate works of polyphony that served as a testament to the intellectual and artistic sophistication of the time. The development of polyphony created a new and pressing problem, the problem of musical notation. The traditional system of pneumatic notation, which was used to notate plain chant, was not adequate for the notation of polyphony. The pneumatic notation could indicate the general contour of a melody, but it could not indicate the precise pitch or the precise rhythm of the notes. The solution to this problem was the invention of a new and more precise system of musical notation, enabling composers to notate their music with greater accuracy and transmit it to future generations. The key figure in the development of musical notation was Guido of Arezzo, an 11th-century Italian monk. Guido was a brilliant and innovative music theorist, credited with inventing the musical staff, a set of 4 horizontal lines that allowed for the precise notation of pitch. Guido also developed a system of psalmization, using syllables to represent the notes of the scale. The Guidonian hand, a mnemonic device used to teach psalmization syllables, was a powerful tool for teaching and learning music, remaining in use for centuries. The development of polyphony and the invention of musical notation were two of the most important and enduring achievements of the Middle Ages. They were a testament to the creativity, ingenuity, and spiritual aspirations of medieval scholars. The music of the Middle Ages was not merely a form of entertainment, it was also a means of intellectual and spiritual exploration, a way of delving into the mysteries of the universe and the human soul. The medieval scholars who created this music were the guardians of a precious artistic and spiritual heritage, and they passed that heritage on to succeeding generations, a gift of incalculable value. The medieval world was a world of faith, where the sacred and the secular were inextricably intertwined. This deep and abiding faith found its most vivid and powerful expression in the cult of relics and the practice of pilgrimage. Relics, the physical remains of saints, and the objects associated with them, were believed to be a source of divine power, a tangible link between the earthly and heavenly realms. Pilgrimage, the journey to a sacred place, was a way of expressing one's devotion, of seeking forgiveness for one's sins, and of experiencing the transformative power of the sacred. The cult of relics was a central feature of medieval Christianity. The relics of the saints were believed to possess the power to heal the sick, protect the vulnerable, and work miracles. They were housed in magnificent reliquaries, often crafted from gold, silver, and precious gems. The reliquaries were not just containers for the relics, they were also works of art, testaments to the skill and artistry of medieval artisans. The cult of relics was a powerful and pervasive one, having a profound and lasting impact on the religious, cultural, and artistic life of the Middle Ages. The practice of pilgrimage was closely linked to the cult of relics. The great pilgrimage sites of the Middle Ages, such as Rome, Jerusalem, and Santiago de Compostela, were all home to essential relics. The pilgrims who traveled to these sites were not just tourists, they were also spiritual seekers, on a quest for a deeper and more authentic experience of the sacred. The journey to a pilgrimage site was often a long and arduous one, fraught with danger and hardship. But the pilgrims were sustained by their faith and driven by a deep and powerful desire to come into contact with the divine. The practice of pilgrimage was not just religious, it was also social and cultural. The pilgrimage routes were the great highways of the Middle Ages, serving as a significant conduit for the exchange of goods, ideas, and people. The pilgrims who traveled along these routes came from all walks of life, from the highest nobles to the humblest peasants. They were a diverse and motley crew, and their stories offer a fascinating window into the social and cultural life of the Middle Ages. The pilgrimage was a great social leveler, a time when people from all different backgrounds could come together and share a common experience. The cult of relics and the practice of pilgrimage were integral to the intellectual and cultural life of the Middle Ages. They were a powerful expression of the medieval love of wonder and mystery, and they were a way of making the sacred tangible and accessible. Medieval scholars, who were the guardians of the intellectual heritage of the past, were also active participants in the religious and cultural life of their time. They wrote treatises on the theological significance of relics, and they composed guidebooks for pilgrims. The story of relics and pilgrimage is a powerful reminder that the quest for knowledge is not just an intellectual one, it is also a spiritual and a cultural one, a quest that involves the whole person, body, and soul. The story of medieval scholars is a tale of preservation and transmission, a narrative of how the intellectual and cultural heritage of the past was kept alive during a time of profound crisis. However, it is also a story of innovation and transformation, a tale of how medieval scholars laid the foundations for the intellectual and cultural achievements of the modern world. The transition from the Middle Ages to the Renaissance was not a sudden and dramatic break, it was a slow and gradual process, a process in which the old and the new were intertwined in a complex and creative synthesis. The medieval scholars were not just the guardians of a dying world, they were also the midwives of a new one. The traditional view of the Renaissance is that it was a radical break with the past, a time when the light of the modern world suddenly dispelled the darkness of the Middle Ages. This view, first articulated by the Renaissance humanists themselves, has been a powerful and enduring one. But it is also a misleading and simplistic one. The Renaissance was not a rejection of the Middle Ages, it was a continuation and a transformation of the Middle Ages. The humanists of the Renaissance were not just rebels and iconoclasts, they were also the heirs to a long and distinguished tradition of medieval scholarship. The relationship between medieval scholasticism and Renaissance humanism is a complex and much debated one. The humanists were often critical of the scholastics, whom they accused of being overly concerned with logic and metaphysics and of writing in a barbaric and inelegant style of Latin. But the humanists were also profoundly indebted to the scholastics. They inherited from the scholastics a commitment to the rigorous and systematic study of the past, and they built upon the foundations laid by medieval scholars. The humanists were not only interested in the revival of classical antiquity, they were also concerned with reforming the church and revitalizing Christian life. They were, in many ways, the true heirs of the medieval scholars, the men and women who had dedicated their lives to preserving and transmitting the Christian intellectual tradition. The legacy of the medieval scholars is a rich and complex one. They were the guardians of a precious intellectual and cultural heritage, passing it on to succeeding generations as a gift of incalculable value. They were also the pioneers of a new and more critical approach to the study of the past. This approach would eventually lead to the development of modern historical scholarship. They were the founders of the universities, the great centers of learning that have driven intellectual and scientific progress for centuries. They were the creators of a new and revolutionary form of music, a form that would transform the sound of Western civilization. They were the builders of the great Gothic cathedrals, the magnificent and awe-inspiring structures that are a testament to the skill, artistry, and faith of the men who constructed them. The story of medieval scholars is a tale of the enduring power of the human spirit, a story of how a small and dedicated group of men and women kept the flame of learning alive in the darkest of times. It is a story full of drama, passion, and intellectual and spiritual adventure. It is a story that is as relevant today as it was 1,000 years ago. The medieval scholars were the unsung heroes of a forgotten age, the men and women who laid the foundations for the modern world. Their story serves as a potent reminder that the pursuit of knowledge is a noble and enduring endeavor. This quest is essential to the survival and flourishing of human civilization. The story of the medieval scholars is, in the end, a story of an unbroken chain. It is a story of how the intellectual and cultural heritage of the past was passed down from one generation to the next, a precious and fragile gift that was preserved and transmitted during a time of profound crisis. Medieval scholars were the guardians of this heritage, the men and women who dedicated their lives to preserving and transmitting knowledge. They were the unsung heroes of a forgotten age, the men and women who laid the foundations for the modern world. The world of medieval scholars was one of faith, where the sacred and the secular were inextricably intertwined. The medieval scholars were not just intellectuals, they were also men and women of deep and abiding faith. They believed that the pursuit of knowledge was a form of prayer, a way of serving God and the Church. They saw the world as a book written by the hand of God, and they believed that studying the natural world was a way of understanding the mind of the Creator. Medieval scholars were not only interested in preserving knowledge but also in integrating it, creating a comprehensive and unified understanding of the universe. The world of medieval scholars was also a world of violence and instability, where the flame of learning was constantly in danger of being extinguished. The collapse of the Roman Empire, the barbarian invasions, the Viking raids, and the Black Death, these were just some of the challenges that medieval scholars faced. But they did not despair. Their faith sustained them, and they were driven by a deep and powerful desire to preserve the intellectual and cultural heritage of the past. They were the guardians of a precious flame, and they passed that flame on to succeeding generations, a gift of incalculable value. The legacy of the medieval scholars is a rich and complex one. They were the founders of the universities, the great centers of learning that have driven intellectual and scientific progress for centuries. They were the creators of a new and revolutionary form of music, a form that would transform the sound of Western civilization. They were the builders of the great Gothic cathedrals, the magnificent and awe-inspiring structures that are a testament to the skill, artistry, and faith of the men who constructed them. They were the pioneers of a new and more critical approach to the study of the past, an approach that would eventually lead to the development of modern historical scholarship. They were the guardians of a precious intellectual and cultural heritage, passing it on to succeeding generations as a gift of incalculable value. The story of medieval scholars is a tale full of drama, passion, and intellectual and spiritual adventure. It is a story that is as relevant today as it was 1,000 years ago. The medieval scholars were the unsung heroes of a forgotten age, the men and women who laid the foundations for the modern world. Their story serves as a potent reminder that the pursuit of knowledge is a noble and enduring endeavor. This quest is essential to the survival and flourishing of human civilization. The medieval scholars were the keepers of the flame, and their legacy is a light that continues to shine brightly in the modern world. As we conclude this journey through the landscape of human genius, we are reminded that the most significant discoveries are not endpoints but beginnings, invitations to ask new questions, to explore new possibilities, to continue the eternal human quest for understanding. The minds we have encountered tonight were not the culmination of human achievement but waypoints on a journey that continues still, a journey in which each of us can play a part. Subscribe and let history's greatest minds guide you to peaceful rest and fascinating dreams. Our mission is to make history accessible, comforting, and inspiring, transforming your bedtime routine into a journey of discovery and wonder. Subscribe for weekly historical bedtime stories. Join thousands of listeners who have made learning a part of their nightly routine. Each week, we bring you new stories of brilliant minds, groundbreaking discoveries, and the human spirit's endless capacity for wonder. Just as videos help you sleep better, your engagement helps us reach others seeking intelligent, calming content for relaxation. Every like tells us which stories resonate most deeply with our community. Share your favorite historical figures in the comments. We love hearing from our listeners. Please tell us which brilliant minds from history fascinate you most. Your suggestions help shape our future episodes and connect us with fellow history enthusiasts. Have a particular historical figure or period that captivates your imagination? We're always looking for new stories to explore. From ancient philosophers to modern innovators, from forgotten heroes to legendary geniuses, your ideas inspire our research. Perfect for your nightly routine, whether you're winding down after a long day, seeking inspiration before sleep, or simply looking to learn something new in a peaceful setting, our stories are carefully crafted for rest and reflection. Each narrative is designed to engage your mind while calming your spirit, turning bedtime into an opportunity for growth and discovery. Join our community of curious minds. You're not just subscribing to a channel, you're joining a community of people who believe that learning never stops, that history has lessons for today, and that the greatest minds of the past can still inspire us in the present. Together, we're proving that education doesn't have to be stressful or demanding, it can be as natural and peaceful as drifting off to sleep. The greatest minds in history started with simple curiosity. Tonight, as you close your eyes, remember that you carry within you the same capacity for wonder that drove Socrates to question, Leonardo to create, Marie to discover, Einstein to imagine, Tesla to innovate, and Darwin to observe. Your own journey of discovery continues with each new day, each new question, each new moment of wonder. Sleep well, dream sincerely, and wake tomorrow ready to see the world with the fresh eyes of history's greatest minds.